Welcome to Mic Drop, the podcast where relevancy is irrelevant and we don't give a shit about your feelings. There, in a shallow desert ditch, was a gray-haired Caucasian male, his head split to the white meat. A pile of brains had oozed to the ground where Timmy had put Joby's 380. Blood droplets, sprayed into the sand and dirt, made small, dark constellations. His blue jeans were splattered with purple, quarter-sized splotches. His wrists and ankles were bound with duct tape. His hands were limp. It was already over 100 degrees, and the promise of coagulated blood and exposed matter had begun to attract flies. He wore a black leather jacket whose top rocker, the curved cloth patch that spanned the shoulder blades, read, "Mongols." I asked, "You think he's dead?" Timmy said, "Dude looks deader than disco. Shit, those look like his brains in the dirt." Timmy leaned in closer. "Yeah, I'd say he's pretty dead." He spat a stream of phlegm into the brush beyond the grave. "Dude, no fucking around here. We go home and show the boys we killed a Mongol, then we better be dead nuts sure it doesn't look like he's coming back." Timmy smiled. "Relax, Bird, we got this." Like Lionel Richie said, "We're easy like Sunday morning." Ladies and gentlemen, once again, it is my honor and pleasure to have the guest that's sitting across the table from me today. The depths at which we're going to get into the human mind today, I'm excited to bring you. This gentleman is not just a patriot, but is a former All Pac-10 wide receiver at the University of Arizona. He's got a BS in public administration from the U of A. He was a special agent with the ATF, conducted over 500 undercover operations. He's a subject matter expert in violent crime investigations, weapons and narcotics trafficking, gang infiltrations, home invasion burglaries, and murder for hire cases. He has received the following accreditations and awards from the ATF to include the Attorney General's Medal of Valor, 12 ATF Special Act Awards, 2 ATF Gold Stars for critical injuries, ATF Distinguished Service Medal, International Narcotics Officers Association Medal of Valor, and the National Association of Police Officers Top Cop Award. He is an undercover agent that successfully infiltrated the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club. He is a New York Times best-selling author of the book No Angel, which details that infiltration. He currently owns and operates the Jay Dobyns Group, which trains law enforcement officers in tactics and protocols and does speaking engagements. And last but certainly not least, he is what we in the special operations community would call a fucking pipe hitter. Welcome, Jay Dobyns.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I got to tell you, it's my pleasure. I read your book over the last couple of weeks, and it's remarkably fascinating to me. A lot of questions that I think not just I have, but our nation has in terms of what you guys go through, what undercover operations look like, the types of ins and outs, the right and left flank in terms of what you're allowed to do, what you're encouraged to do, what you're not allowed to do. A lot of things got clarified to me in this book, and I want to dive deeper into kind of the psyche behind what goes through your mind and how it affects you and all those things. We're gonna get way into it, and I can't wait to bring you guys, the listeners, in on this inner circle because it's fucking amazing. What I would like to do is throw out a quick note in terms of the medium in which this podcast is brought to light. And it's something that I'm proud of, frankly, but I want to just throw out there real quick in terms of the language. Jay and I are going to talk frankly, and we're going to talk about some things that are uncomfortable to hear, but that you should hear. More importantly, for the people that are out there that get offended, I want to address you guys first and foremost, is that, to me, we don't talk the way that we talk to try to drive ratings. We don't do it to try to piss people off. We do it because that's who we are. Military guys, special agents with federal law enforcement groups, we stare into the abyss and it stares back. And it brings out a certain type of individual where you have to have a certain sense of humor, albeit dark. You have to be able to deal with things in a manner in which most people have a real hard time wrapping their fucking mind around. Because of that, we talk a certain way. But more importantly, on a broader prospect, is that, for the people out there that want to turn it off because they're offended, I would just say this. When you get offended by somebody saying something, you're in essence turning over the control over your emotions to somebody else. That's really the bottom line, is that it's weakness. So stop being weak out there. This country needs to pull its collective head out of its ass and stop being a pussy about everything and getting offended every time somebody says something they don't like. So listen to it. Appreciate what this man has been through and what we're going to delve into, because it's an amazing story. There's a ton of good life lessons to pull out of here, and I can't wait to share them with all you fine folks. So without further ado, we're going to get right into the book. One of the things that I want to talk about, just kind of going through these different excerpts, is that, is pulling out an excerpt and then having you talk about
Sure.
it. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So here is the first one that I think I found interesting. I didn't come from a line of cops. I wasn't raised in the projects. An alcoholic father didn't beat me. I grew up in white, middle-class America with a bike and a baseball glove and family vacations. I played football and played it well. I went to college as a wide receiver for the Arizona Wildcats. Most wideouts want to outrun defense for game-winning passes, catch the ball over their shoulder, and screw the prom queen. I wouldn't have minded the prom queen, but I wasn't that kind of receiver. The coaches knew this, and they put me in at number 6 on the depth chart. That had to change. I jumped in the play rotations. Whenever a slant over the middle was called, or to crack a linebacker that was needed. I got the dog snot beat out of me down after down. One play, I got an out route and the ball was overthrown. I ran out of bounds into the desert, grabbing the ball but landing in a patch of cholla cactus. Now, one of the things I noticed about, kind of your typical upbringing and similar to mine, is that a lot of law enforcement guys, because I run around with a lot of them now with the dog stuff at every different level. But the similarity in our upbringings, I noticed, I'm from the Midwest, you're from the Midwest. A lot of guys have that kind of, nothing crazy in the background, a very, middle class, Midwest, suburban type of upbringing. Did you find that same thing? And why do you think that there's such a similarity there in terms of guys?
Well, I had a very common man's upbringing, lifestyle around me. My dad was a carpenter for 60 years. My mom washed people's toilets that didn't want to wash their own toilet. Everything I'd ever known from the youngest age that I could remember was that you do for yourself, you go out, you earn your way, you pull your weight, you don't expect anything from anybody, no one's going to hand you anything. If you want something, you go work for it. There was no privilege involved in it, but like that excerpt you read, I think in the Undercover game, there's sometimes a perception that you have to have grown up in the environment that you're trying to infiltrate to fully understand it. And that's not really the case. I know a lot of people that do what I do for a living that didn't either grow up in ghettos or trailer parks or whatever venue that operation might be operating in. Mm-hmm. And you train for it, and you use your experience, and you acclimate, and you study the enemy, and all those things, how they talk, how they walk, what clothes they wear, what they drive, where do they live, what does the environment that they live in look like, everything. What does it smell like? And if you do that, and if you treat the job like to the trade craft that is necessary, then you ultimately become good at it with, through experience. But it's a common man, blue collar approach to the job.
Yeah. And so would you say that a lot of your coworkers were similarly brought up in terms of, didn't have those types of experiences to help out with that?
Yeah. I think there's, various levels of lifestyle that my peers grew up in. You know, a good friend of mine grew up in the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago, which was a rough housing project, right? So, did he maybe had a head start into the understanding of that lifestyle? You know, when he's growing up in a Chicago housing project that's designed to hold 30,000 people, and it's holding 60,000 people.
Yeah.
You know, and the drugs and the violence around it, he saw that as a young age and translated that. But how many people grow up like most of us don't?
Yeah.
Most of us don't. Most of us are a little bit more privileged than that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, you know, just kind of the all walks of life, I guess, that I know in the SEAL teams, like, you know, we had guys that were from Nebraska or Iowa like me. We had guys that were from, you know, Boston that grew up, you know, in South Boston getting beat up. We had, you know, guys that were from Wall Street, guys that were, you know, polo players in California. You know, there's, you know, the common man with an uncommon will to succeed, you know, is kind of what bound us together as a constant, you know. But it sounds like, you know, and again, with my experience that I've had with some of the law enforcement groups that I operate or work with now, there's a lot of similarities there. You see some pretty wild swaths in terms of the disparity between different backgrounds.
Well, I universally, I think it's common men being put in uncommon situations, and how do they react to them? And I think, like from your world, the way I look at you guys is that you can be tough without having to carry yourself like a tough guy. You know, the people that survive and thrive in your world, they're tough men. They're tough people. But for the most part, the people that I know, they don't walk around with a chip on their shoulder, waiting for a chance to demonstrate, you know, that they can knock you out or choke you out or tap you out to prove themselves. They're actually try to diffuse those types of situations, try to mitigate and minimize those situations so that they don't have to put on a public demonstration of being a tough guy. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because there's a couple different excerpts in here that I drew kind of that same thing, was that polar opposite in terms of the guys that you infiltrated were the opposite of that. It was peacock feathers all over the fucking place. And so we're going to get into that here in a minute, but you know, I'm glad that's already an observation. The next excerpt I wanted to get into was, it seems like, you know, from reading this, that your draw to the adrenaline of, you know, what you kind of started to experience in college with the football games and being, you know, a good above average, you know, college ball player, and the kind of notoriety and the fame and the, you know, just the kind of collective respect that it just dumped in your lap, that, you know, once that goes away, you know, it's tough to replace that. It's tough to supplement that. And I know a lot of our guys go through that same thing. They get out and they've been, you know, a SEAL or a Green Beret or whatever. And that comes with a lot of garnished, you know, respect. And now all of a sudden you're an insurance salesman and nobody gives a fuck, you know? Yep. And so people are like, Christ, now what do I do? And so it sounds like that was kind of a fill for you. And this excerpt, I think, highlights that. Is, I knew I could cobble together a career of 2 or 3 years, but every year I'd have to reprove myself in camp, and at best I'd be a 3rd or 4th string option. My dreams were crushed and I didn't know what to do. I'd gotten too used to crowds screaming for me, too addicted to adrenaline to just let it go. Eventually I turned to law enforcement. I was young and I bought into the Hollywood vision of being a cop. I considered the FBI and Secret Service, but ultimately I ended up at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. This was where I would transform from star college athlete to hardened undercover cop. Is that kind of what drew you there? Or?
Well, yeah, I think that that story or that element of my story is a demonstration that our goals can and will change. When I was a kid, all I ever wanted to do was to be a football player. Yeah, that's, you know, when I was young, advice, the instructions, the encouragement I received from my father were never like really performance related towards football. They were always toughness related. He was like, don't let somebody knock you down and celebrate over the top of you. Get up, get back on your feet. You know, don't let somebody taunt you. You're going to get knocked down. Always, I don't care if you have to drag yourself off to the sidelines. Yeah. Do not let someone have the satisfaction of putting you out.
Yeah.
So I'm remembered as a football player, at least locally in Tucson, as being a better performer than I actually was. Mm-hmm. The reality of it is what we talked about earlier, is that I played like the common man. And I think the common man related to me. I just played reckless. I played hard. I threw myself around. I knew what my role was. Yeah. I loved my role. And that's like when we're talking about like not catching touchdown passes over your shoulder and running slants and getting knocked out. I loved it because I knew what my role was on the team. And that's ultimately like the best way for me to honor my teammates was to just do my role the best I could.
Yeah.
And
the assists.
Yeah. So, you know, as a kid at 21 years old, I thought I had it all figured out. I was going to, you know, I had made some All Pac-10 teams, and I had been named on some All-America teams, and I was going to go into the draft, get drafted, play 10 years in the league, you know, maybe make some Pro Bowls. If I was lucky enough, go to a Super Bowl. And then I was going to retire and sit at the bar and, you know, with my name over the top of the sign and sign autographs and tell lies and manage my investments. You know, at 21 years old, I thought I had it figured out.
Yeah.
And I went to the 1984 NFL Combine, and I was going to show off. I was going to show people like who I was. And I get paired up with a couple guys that I'd never heard of. One of the cats was from Kutztown State. I didn't even heard of Kutztown State. I had to ask him where it was at. You know, oh, it's in Pennsylvania. You know, shake hands, man. Good luck today. Another cat's from a little school in Mississippi, my size, my build. And we start running around. And Al Davis, who was a patriarch of the league, was the Oakland Raiders founder and very instrumental in the league and very well recognized and known, was out on the field that day. And I walked up to him and I said, Coach Davis, hey, how am I doing? And he scrolls down his player list. He's like, Dobyns, yeah, you're the fastest slow guy I've seen all day. Right? And I was like, wow. So 10 minutes into these drills, like talking about having your goals morph, 10 minutes into the drills, I went in so confident I was going to show off. I realized I was going to have to do something other than be a professional football player, because I couldn't do what these guys that I'd never heard of were doing. Yeah. Now, granted, ultimately, the kid from Kutztown State was a player named Andre Reed, who played for 15 years in the league for the Bills and is in the Hall of Fame. And the guy from the little school in Mississippi was Jerry Rice, who's arguably, you know, the best or one of the best football players ever. So I wasn't judging myself against the fairest competition, but I realized, man, this ain't going to work. Yeah. You're not as good as you think you are. Yeah. But when I transitioned into like now, hey, I'm going to have to do something else, I did it with a clear conscience because I knew that I had done everything I could to be as good as I could. I didn't leave anything on the table. Yeah. I just flat out wasn't good enough. Yeah. It's not hard for me to admit that because I know there was nothing left for me to do to try to make it. Yeah.
The thing that I think is really cool about you know, hearing kind of your style, your personality on the field is that was a direct translation into how you operated as an undercover agent. You know, like just fucking reckless. Like some of the stories, and I mean, I could spend 10 hours here pulling every story out of here. For those of you listening, get the book. Like it's a riveting book that you can't put down. Like it's just story after story after story of these crazy shit that this guy's done. But a lot of it, I think, is that same kind of personality that you're talking about on the field. Is that you got after it. You know, like you just like a pit bull, just nose down, just getting into it and you let the supervisors handle the paperwork, and like you just went balls to the wall, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think that ultimately a lot of what translated into my career as an ATF agent was learned on sports fields and on ball fields as a kid. All those character traits and those things you experience, especially in team sports, of knowing your role, embracing your role, doing it the best you can, and expecting the other people around you to do what they're doing the best they can.
Yeah, and I think not to get too far off the weeds, but our society needs more of that. Less participation trophies, more team sports, and more realistic expectations in terms of what parents have or don't have of their kids. But involving them in team sports. I mean, that to me, I was the same way growing up. I played every sport I could play basically, and wasn't particularly fantastic at any of them. I was above average in a couple, but the life lessons I learned from that, and then ultimately transferring into the SEAL teams is huge.
Well, like as an athlete, I look at myself like I was a great high school player. I was an average college player, and I was a shitty pro. Every step that the quality of the talent went up, I wasn't quite able to keep up. Yeah. I kept getting left farther and farther behind athletically.
Yeah. Yep. Not a lot of transformation going from the field to your professional career. I think that's awesome. So ultimately you end up with the ATF as a special agent. Like you're basically a brand new guy. It's 1987. You're on your first real world operation. So from what I've read, made some kind of classic rookie mistakes. But the invincibility feeling that you got, because here you are in your first operation and you get fucking shot. Like, how often does that happen? Like, welcome to the club, right?
Yeah, man. Tough introduction. I got hired on a Monday. And on a Thursday, I was taken hostage. The bullet, bullet went in my back and went through my lung. Missed my heart by millimeters, exited my chest. And when I came to ATF, I had left one goal, that football goal, behind. Mm-hmm. And I, at the time, Miami Vice, the television show, was very popular, right? And man, I wanted to be Sonny Crockett. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to be Sonny Crockett, and I became an ATF agent because I wanted to work undercover. But my view of it was skewed by the entertainment industry. I didn't have a background in law enforcement. Like I said, I didn't have anybody in my family that had lived that life, and so I wanted to drive the Lamborghini around South Beach and wear the Hugo Boss suit, and I wanted to negotiate with the kingpin, at some mansion in Miami Beach.
Blow off some stripper's ass.
Have the big titty stripper bring me a pomegranate martini, right? And smoking cigarettes and talking shit. And there's a ton of cocaine on some barge out in the harbor, And then 4 days later, I'm literally bleeding to death in this trailer park. I look up and there's like a single wide trailer that's off tilt, and there's an aluminum awning hanging off of it, and there's cars up on blocks with no tires and a rusted out swing set, and blood coming out of my chest like you're holding your thumb over a garden hose, and a pool of blood growing, and like this crinkled up Doritos bag blows through the blood and sticks. And I was thinking like, man, you know what? I don't remember this episode. I don't remember this happening to Sonny Crockett. I literally thought that God had lost my phone number. I looked back at football and I was like, man, I did everything right. I did everything that you asked me to do, and you didn't give me that. Yeah. And then now I've transitioned into this other job and I'm trying to do things right. And man, like I'm going to die in the
shithole.
The neighborhood we were in was south of Tucson. It's kind of nicknamed Dog Patch. And I think anybody, regardless of where you live, there's a dog patch in your town, right? Yeah. It's a very fitting name for where we were at. And I was like, man, I'm going to bleed to death in the garbage here after 4 days. Yeah. I knew that, my telephone number had fell out of God's Rolodex.
Yeah. So to me, one of the really interesting things about that experience, though, is to me, I think for any agent in that position, that would be a very defining moment one way or the other, right? I can see a lot of people saying, this shit isn't for me. Like, this wasn't in the brochure. Fuck this. I'm out of here. What I find fascinating, and I see it recurring throughout the book and throughout your life story from at least what I've read, is that it kind of defined you the other way. And I'll read this quick excerpt. This is from when you were in the hospital recovering and kind of what was going through your mind as it relates. At night, I'd wake up from time to time. I had a funny feeling. The lights were low. The machines beeped. As I got better, there were fewer and fewer of them in the room. A good sign. The feeling I got was a new one. It was a rush I'd never known. On the football field, I'd hit 1,000 times by hundreds of guys my size or bigger. I'd taken some real kill shots and always tried to get back up right away. It was a pride thing. When they dragged me out of the car, my chest spurting and gurgling, I actually pulled myself into sitting position. It was the best I could do. The new feeling was this: I couldn't be stopped. After being shot, I began to feel the first pangs of invincibility. The rush of near death did something dangerous to me, though I couldn't see it at the time. I didn't want to get shot ever again, but I wanted to get as close to that flying bullet as I possibly could. Getting cheered by 80,000 football fans was an incredible feeling, but it didn't even register when compared to the rush of walking the line between life and death when no one was watching. To me, like I said, that's kind of an unexpected response that I think most people, they would not think that that's how you would respond to that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm recovering in the hospital, and I've got like tubes down my throat and a chest tube in, and all kinds of wires and things hooked up to the point where I couldn't even really communicate very well. And there was these personal injury attorneys like lining up in the hallway, like almost coming in, like waiting for a chance at an interview, like one at a time. They were coming in and saying, "Hey kid, you know what $1 million looks like?" I had no idea. You know what $5 million looks like? And like I said, my dad was a carpenter. My mom was a house cleaner. I grew up in Northwest Indiana in the region up there. It's, like people there and people in the lifestyle that we had lived had no idea what that kind of money was. And they were saying, "Let me take your case. I can get you that kind of money. I can sue the government." And the liability they assumed is huge. They put you in a situation that you weren't prepared for, you weren't trained for. You can tell them how many zeros you want them to put on the check. You'll never have to work another day in your life. Your family, your kids will never have to work another day in your life. And I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't take the job for money. Money was never a motivator for me. It's still not a motivating factor for me. Yeah. It's not important. I never had much. I don't need much. I wanted to go back to work, and my personal goal was to stand up for people who either couldn't or wouldn't stand up for themselves against the predators out there. Yeah. The people that are just like good, peaceful people that want to live simple, safe lives. All I'd ever really been good at was standing up to a bully. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it on behalf of other people. Yeah. I didn't care about like $5 million. I couldn't even envision it, let alone know how to spend it or what to do with it.
Yeah. That's the classic sheepdog, mentality that you hear, kind of coined by Dave Grossman with on combat and on killing. But to me, like that seems to be a very common driver with law enforcement, with military, with first responders is kind of that same mentality. And I think that's a good segue into the next portion, which after the shooting. It proved that your job, as you put it, and I'll get right into the next excerpt, which dovetails onto the Miami Vice stuff. But if anything, the shooting proved that my job and therefore my life, not glamorous in any way. Pathetically, I'd imagine the undercover life would be like Miami Vice, full of cigarette boats, fast cars, expensive clothes, perfect 10s and bikinis sitting in my lap while I negotiated with drug kingpins. Instead, I confronted toothless strippers, disgruntled Vietnam vets, and did deals with jonesing tweakers in trailer parks while getting shot at by a broke dick ex-con who lived with his mom. Still, I loved the job. And what a job. In the years between the shooting and the summer of 2001, I'd done and seen things that citizens simply don't do or see. I'd been in another shootout. I'd had an inhuman number of guns shoved in my face. I'd bought and sold tons of drugs, and I'd made hundreds of collars. I'd worked in African-American gangbangers, Italian mobsters, with Italian mobsters and with Chris, one of your coworkers, the Aryan Brotherhood with Special Agent Luis Quinones, and bikers from the Georgia to Colorado with a bunch of different partners, including one of my ATF mentors, Vincent Cefalu. By 2001, I thought I'd seen it all. Yet nearly after 15 years on the job, I still had something to prove. I still had more to see. To me, that kind of exemplifies what you're talking about is that, even after 14 years, which, that was longer than I was in the military. I was in the military 12 years and 3 months. And when I think about all the things I did in that amount of time, I felt like, Christ, I have 2 lifetimes of shit that I've seen,
Sure.
around the world and whatever. But to have gone through all of that type of work for that amount of time, this was all before the premise of where the book takes place. Like, it seems like that's a recurring theme. Like for you, one, it's kind of almost never enough. And 2 is it's like almost like dopamine receptors. Like you get to a next level and it's like, okay, now this is enough. I got to push the envelope more. Is that kind of where it came from? Or?
Yeah. And I think that all those events of my career that led up to the opportunity to take a run at the Angels were necessary. Like I needed all those things. I needed all those experiences to be prepared for what was coming. It was almost the training ground for it, like now, granted 15 years of it, but I needed all that to have that database of knowledge because it was all going to be put back into play. It was all of that was going to come out in various ways over the next couple of years. I didn't understand that. I didn't realize it at the time. But looking back on it, everything that I'd learned in the previous 15 years was needed and necessary in order to be effective or stay alive during that case.
Almost kind of like the K through 12 to get to college, because with Hell's Angels, like that's varsity fucking squad. Like you're not fooling them. So you come in as a cherry and you're going to get fucking eaten alive, right?
And they're a uniquely paranoid group of people. Mm-hmm. They're looking for anything they can to out you. Yeah. And so if you came in there and you weren't squared away and you weren't just cocksure of who you were and what your story was and what your background was, just one little slip leads to a question, which leads to 10 more questions. And then pretty soon they're chasing you down rabbit holes that you don't have answers to. Yeah.
Not to get too far off topic here, but were there ever times where there were legit people that they thought were snitches or undercovers that weren't, and they ended up smoking them or doing shitty things to them because they just assumed?
There's times when people were cut away. I don't know of any personal example or didn't have any personal witness to anybody getting shot or, like some people smacked around a little bit because they were suspected of being a traitor. Yeah. But that's, that's also I don't know, I wouldn't call it a risk, but for lack of better terms, the risk they're willing to take is that they may lose someone who ultimately would have been a good member of their organization
but it's worth it.
It's worth it because they don't want to take the risk. Yeah. If they're not sure, they're not going to take the risk.
Yeah. The irony here is that the next excerpt kind of talks about, at least from the reader's perspective as I was reading it, was that, this was leading up to, you had kind of started getting into lower level stuff, not Hell's Angels groups just yet, but affiliates of theirs. And you'd basically just infiltrated a smaller affiliate biker gang in Arizona and had bought some guns and started, kind of trying to tie into some of the Hell's Angels crew. But what I was fascinated by was at least, again, now with the backstory of how much time you spent preparing for that role, it's not as cut and dry, but it seems like you did it fairly easily. You know, I think your experience is what made it seem easy, but the excerpt goes like this. The next day he sold me 2 45s, no papers, no forms, all cash. It was too easy. Through the years, I was often amused by how quickly suspects decided to trust me. Criminality is a brutal, sometimes comical game of one-upmanship. Bad guys are constantly trying to prove to one another and themselves that they're badder and harder than the next guy. This is one reason Abraham wanted to know if I was a 1%er. Now, in terms of the 1%er stuff, we'll get into in a second, but the fact that you were able to infiltrate them so often, I would love to get kind of a synopsis of how easily criminals will trust you based solely on the commonality or likeness that you are with them. And again, I think that speaks volumes to your competency as an undercover guy. But I also think it plays a role on the human mind in terms of kind of pattern associations. Similarly, the same way forms of racism can be manipulated by either media outlets or society in one way or another, and that, you know, people want to like people that look like them, that act like them, that have similar backgrounds, whatever. And it seems like you use that to your advantage. But I was amazed at how quickly, in some instances, you were able to just fucking walk right in, buy stuff, or get in somebody's back pocket, get in their head, and have them trust you like you're one of their own, like that fast.
Yeah, I think there's a couple explanations for it. I think when we like our first impression of someone is normally it's visual. You know, we see them, and then we oftentimes judge the book by the cover. We size them up and try to figure out what they're about based on their appearance. In that world, and I think probably in your world too, is that the people that survive and thrive in it, there's egos and there's testosterone. And they're, you know, they're very self-confident. What I found, what worked well for me, is that same mentality was on the other side of the fence. It was in the suspects. And to try to have like a big dick contest with these guys, you weren't going to win because they want to be the king of the mountain. Mm-hmm. So when I learned ultimately over the course of time, let them be, you know, be honoring of them, be flattering of them. When you're already seeking that, and then someone who you see looks intimidating to you, conducts themselves or carries themselves in an intimidating way to you, but is honoring of you and is flattering of you and promoting of you, you like, man, I like this guy, man. Yeah. He gets it. Yeah. You know, he understands who I am. He understands I'm the alpha dog. Yeah. I'm the bad motherfucker here. Yeah. Right. And then they embrace it and they suck you in. They want you around. Yeah. They like, these guys almost universally enjoyed the fact that I openly acknowledged that they were mentoring me. Yeah. You know, they came to believe that, you know, I was a hitman and I was running guns and doing home invasions and dealing drugs and doing all these things. So they looked at that like, man, this is a bad cat, but he knows that I'm better than he is. And they love that. Yeah.
God, that's fascinating. And that's something that I mean, it makes perfect sense. You know, it's this, you know, stroking of the ego that just plays right into it. One of the things that I found kind of recurring too is you struck a really good balance of being just nonchalant enough. Like you gave enough of a shit so that they knew that you were legit, but not so much to where it was obvious you were trying too hard. You know, like, yeah, I've got my own shit going on. Or like the times where they would ask you to come in and you're like, yeah, I'm going to have to fucking think about it. And they're like, what do you mean you have to think about it? And you're like, well, I got to honor my guy. Like, you know, like there was still principled elements to how you conducted yourself that seemed, it almost was like a reverse psychology thing, and that it drove them nuts and made them want you even more.
Well, and I think that goes back to early in our conversation, we talked about the 15 years of experience leading up to that. As a young agent, and I'm going to assume this like for yourself, as a young operator, you get sent on a mission, right? And you are determined to make it work. It has to go. And like for me, there were times when I forced something to happen and did everything I could to try to control it when it just wasn't going to be, and kind of fucked it up. Yeah. Right. So over the course of time, And as you build a resume, and as you're not as desperate to prove yourself, I started saying, like, man, you know what? We're going to take a crack at this, and it's okay if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, we're just going to do the best we can. If it doesn't work today, maybe it will tomorrow. Maybe it will next month. Maybe it never will.
Yeah.
So the ability to be the prom queen, you know, and just say, hey, man, you know, like, I don't know if I want you to fuck me. You know, I want to talk to some other people first, man. I want to see who else asks me out on a date.
Yeah.
Man, that when you're on the other side of that, that makes you try harder.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's typical guy stuff too, you know, like, you know, it drives guys crazy. So yeah, I mean, it fits perfect.
You know, this really, like, this world is really that simple. It can almost be reduced to boy-girl stuff.
Yeah.
Like how relationships are built, how, like personal chemistry between a boy and a girl works over, like, you know, even like at an adolescent age, it's very similar to the pursuit and courtship on an infiltration.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I love. There's so many really cool examples in the book that highlight that. If you really pay attention to not just what he does, but how he goes about it. And again, I can't recommend it enough. Just for some kind of historical context and background on biker gangs as kind of a broad perspective, I want to just run through something quick so that people can kind of understand the hierarchy of it. And when we're talking about these 1%ers and what you call OMGs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, which I find fucking hilarious, by the way. But the 1%er thing, I'll pull this quick excerpt out so people can kind of wrap their head around it. This phrase originated when rogue bikers ran roughshod over a 1947 motorcycle rally in Hollister, California. These troublemakers were described as the 1% of the American motorcycle riding public that is criminal by the American Motorcyclist Association. The name stuck and was proudly worn by those riders who considered themselves to be outlaws. The four major American outlaw clubs are the Pagans in the East, the Outlaws in the Midwest, the Bandidos in Texas, and the Hells Angels, who are found throughout the country in at least 20 states. The other three clubs may beg to differ, but the Hells Angels are the premier outlaw club in the United States and the world. If you could, just kind of give us a quick synopsis on the breakdown of biker gangs, anything that you want to add above and beyond that. But to me, the thing that I'm most curious about, and I think most people are, in terms of that 1%er, like what would you say today's population of 1%ers and no shit legitimate like outlaw motorcycle guys, like what do you suppose the population is of that?
Yeah, well, the 1%ers advertise it. They wear a 1%er diamond on their vest. They're basically advertising to everybody like, hey, I at least consider myself a criminal, or my gang considers myself a criminal gang.
Yeah.
There's lots of, thousands and thousands, if not millions of people out there riding motorcycles for the joy of riding, for the love of riding. Some of them are in mom and pops clubs. Some of them are in other clubs that aren't gangs. They may even format their vests the way that a biker gang does. That doesn't mean they're involved in criminal activity. Yeah. The biker gangs, they want to sell us, like through their propaganda machines, that they're just these rascals who don't want to live by society's rules. They want to live by their own rules. And, they do a good job of it through their propaganda. They do their blood drives and their toy runs, and these public service things. And they're kind of these lovable teddy bear types, right? Yeah. But every aspect of crime is going on behind the scenes. Yeah. Murder, rape, drug running, gun running, extortion, arson, human trafficking, prostitution, money laundering.
Tons of bad shit.
If there's money to be made, through criminal activity, the 1%er gangs are involved in it.
I guess one just kind of off the cuff question is: does cyber criminality are they getting into that at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's something that I think most people, you wouldn't assume that like biker gangs have like hackers and shit, but they do. It sounds like
cybercrime. Just like credit card fraud and electronic frauds.
Yeah.
you know, and you look at some of these guys and they don't really fit the profile. You know, they don't necessarily fit the millennial hacker profile, or like the Nigerian prince profile, or all these like different views we have of who's trying to run a scam on us. Yeah. Most of these dudes are not guys that, you know, are necessarily book smart, college educated guys, but they have their PhDs in the street. Yeah. You know, violence and intimidation and street smarts, they're as good as anybody. Yeah. It's really neat. Could you put a number on, you know, to say how many like 1%ers are there? Is it thousands, tens of thousands in the States, do you think? Without being an expert on, you know, biker intelligence, I'd say tens of thousands. Tens of thousands amongst all the 1%er gangs. Yeah.
Sure. It's more than I think a lot of people realize. You know, obviously people see, you know, bikers, especially the weekend, you know, Harley riders that, you know, are accountants, and they like to throw their, you know, their bullshit cuts on and their chaps and make it, you know, make it look like it. But it sounds like there's still, you know, tens of thousands is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that's a significant number.
Yeah. There's, you know, and the real deal outlaws sniff out the counterfeits, you know, real easy. You know, the guy who's a dentist who puts on wraparound sunglasses and puts a do-rag on Saturday and rides his $90,000 motorcycle and scowls at everybody. Yeah. Man, they're a joke. Yeah. In that world, I'm not going to say they're a joke in who they are, but in trying to be accepted into that outlaw community, simply based on that, they're a joke.
That's priceless. One thing that I didn't know, even though guilty pleasure admittance here, is Sons of Anarchy, which we'll get into that here in a minute or in a few minutes. But you know, I loved that show. I think obviously a lot of people did, but even understanding, you know, kind of the hierarchy and the breakdown of nomads, you know, charters, clubs, you know, that being better versed than I was prior to that show coming out, I still learned a lot from your book. But one quick pull I want to grab out of here and then have you expound on is kind of that breakdown. And it goes like this: Smitty belonged to the Arizona Nomad Charter of the Hells Angels. Most large 1%er clubs have nomad charters. They're divisions within the club that belong to a state but don't have a fixed location. At the time, the Arizona Hells Angels had fixed charters in Tucson, Mesa, Phoenix, Cave Creek, and Skull Valley, while their Nomad charter kept a small clubhouse in Flagstaff. They had the state covered. I'd seen Smitty around. He looked like a hippie granddad, swirling black and white beard, big old man sunglasses, a bald crown that topped a curtain of long, stiff hair. When he smiled, which I'd learned was often for Hells Angels, he looked like a lovable goofball. Now, two things that out of here is just that nomad breakdown. You know, that was something I didn't really get, I guess. Maybe I wasn't fucking paying attention in Sons of Anarchy, but I guess you know, kind of what's the point of having these floating nomad charters? Do they kind of almost act like in the military, we'd call it a quick reaction force, like they go help other charters out that have fixed locations if need be, or what?
Yeah, a lot of times they're guys that aren't actually physically, they don't live physically close enough to one of the core charters. And so they're, you know, they're little kind of renegades, you know, who wander in and have a little more flexibility. But, you know, one thing I thought was interesting is that I found that the various charters almost had individual personalities, you know, based on who was in them. And then I found that, like, even if you looked at the global perspective of these guys, the personalities in the country, like in North America, were like the East Coast Angels had a like a traditional organized crime vibe about them, like kind of that mobster vibe about them.
Much more so than the West Coast.
Yeah, the West Coast Angels had more of a rock and roll, Hollywood glamour vibe about them. The Canadian Hells Angels were like straight, like businessmen, straight, like making money, like suit and tie cats, right? And then the European Angels were like more like what the stereotype that we have from that like 60s and 70s biker, that Altamont motor speedway type vibe about them. And so even within the various parts of the country, various aspects to North America, and then on a global perspective, there's all these different personalities of the areas and the charters, and then wrapped in with the various personalities of the people that make up those charters. Man, it was a trip, man. It was like there's a psychological study there for someone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like even as ironic as it is that the region in which they're from significantly affects their culture within that area, which they're trying to get away from. But obviously, with that big a disparity between Canada and West Coast and Europe, like that's got to be a role, right?
Well, like I ended up in Skull Valley, in the Skull Valley Charter, but Skull Valley was run by an ex-New Yorker. Mm-hmm. The Skull Valley president, when I was a part of it, was a cat named Teddy Toth. Teddy Toth, was born and raised and cut his teeth as a Hell's Angel in New York City. He ran the 3rd Street Charter. So Teddy maintained that East Coast mentality, but now he was out here on the West Coast, and we'd see guys like wearing tennis shoes, West Coast guys wearing tennis shoes, wearing shorts,
mm-hmm. Like while they're riding with their coats on.
Yeah, riding with like knee socks, a couple times, like I showed up like at the charter, like with flip-flops. Yeah. And he was like, hey, in this charter, don't you ever fucking show up with any bullshit like that. Don't fucking embarrass me. Yeah. He had that John Gotti mentality. Yeah. From the East Coast of how you can of how criminal bikers should act and carry themselves, and it didn't necessarily fit out West. Yeah,
was there any correlation between that mentality and being more violent? Like, was one region kind of historically more violent than the rest, or?
That's a good question. I think that. The mentalities are a little bit different. It's like, I want to say that the East Coast is more of a punch you in the mouth type mm-hmm. mentality, where the West Coast is more of a slice your throat mentality. Yeah.
So what are the Canadians then like? Are they, were they less violent because they were so much more geared towards just making money?
Man, I think that, there's an extreme amount of violence up there, but the mentality and the personality in the United States is that tough guy, intimidation, shock effect mentality. From a lot of the Canadian members, their motivation didn't seem like it was as strong to shock you. Their motivation was, how much money can I make? Yeah. How much wealth can I acquire?
Sure. That's fascinating. Again, it's kind of subsets of the biker culture that most people, would have no idea. I know I find it fascinating, including this next part, which is where you mentioned a guy named Smitty a lot in this book, and he was kind of one of the guys that seemed like he played a big role. He's, an affiliate or a guy that was in with some of these guys, but not an actual patched member, for the simple fact that, and I'll read just this a quick excerpt. A guy named Varvel, who you're dealing with guns, was a former military guy and involved with some of those dudes, but Varvel loved Smitty the most. Varvel maintained that the Angels wanted to recruit him, but that they couldn't because of his job, which he refused to give up. He was a school nurse, which was simply not badass enough. To me, I think most people assume that, all of these guys are, bike mechanics or, whatever the fuck they do in their normal day-to-day job. Like, it reflects a lot of the culture of the club, and to find out, like, here's this old lovable goofball that smiles, looks like a hippie granddad with big old man glasses. I mean, looks like fucking Santa Claus from the sounds of it, and is a school nurse. To me, that again, I think flips a lot of the stereotype that most people would have with some of who these guys are. I mean, that there's got to be an element to that is hard to grasp.
Well, you've got guys in the gang who fit the old school stereotype. They look and act Like they don't have jobs. They're out hustling crime. One of the members had a $200,000 a year, like ran aftermarket parts for an auto dealer. One of the members was an America West pilot who was, flying a commercial airliner every week. That's with crazy. Hundreds of civilian passengers on it.
Nobody listening right now is going to look at their fucking pilot the same. They're going to be like, are you a biker, you son of a bitch?
Well, the thing is, too, is this cat, like when you looked at him, when he had his pilot's uniform on, you wouldn't have been able to tell. Yeah. You might as well be pumping gas next to this guy or standing next to him at the grocery store. He just looked like everybody else with his, with long sleeves on.
Yeah. To me, it dovetails into the next element of your book that is kind of one of the overarching themes that I am curious about, and I know a lot of other people will be, is that when you talk about historically the two main barriers that have prevented law enforcement from wholeheartedly investigating outlaw motorcycle gangs, this excerpt is a little long. Just bear with me, though, because it builds a lot of that context, and I want to get your opinion on it because I have kind of some of my own ideas, but I'd love to hear your insight. And it dovetails onto what I just said. On the high end, the bosses don't give them much credit as criminals. It's much more fashionable to go after volume dealers of drugs, arms, or explosives. If the bosses are more concerned with making a lot of cases, then it's easier to move against small-timers like Varvels and Abrahams of the world, two of the smaller biker guys. Going after groups like Hell's Angels takes time, commitment, trust, risk, and money, a lethal recipe for a bureaucracy like ATF. On the low end, the fact that some biker investigators assimilate and sympathize with their adversaries, some even form their own clubs. This has always been a mystery to me. Cops don't mimic mafia dons or dress as Crips and Bloods and form up neighborhood sets, so why would some choose to create their own motorcycle clubs patterned after criminal syndicates? Maybe it's because they're bound by the bikes themselves. One thing that cuts across all of them is the live to ride, ride to live credo. Regardless of the reasons, these forces, a disregard for their legitimacy from above, a wary respect to kinship from below, combined to give the bikers some semblance of safe haven. Here is what I thought. Yes, guns and drugs ruin people's lives, but what truly ruins people's lives is violence. And violence was and is the source of the Hells Angels' power. And so, to me, one of the things that kind of sticks out at this is what we were talking about earlier, and just like you said, is that cops aren't typically sympathizing with, with Crips and Bloods or Mafia Dons or whatever. Like they're doing everything in their power to go after these guys. And the only thing I can think of is that commonality and background, the human nature. It's human nature to develop patterns and make likenesses out of different groups and whatever like that. It's natural, but. And I'll be the first to admit I had to look this up. I'd love to tell you I'm this fucking smart, but it's reverse Stockholm syndrome. Most people have heard of Stockholm syndrome. The reverse of that is called Lima syndrome, which is exactly what we're talking about, which is where cops or people in authoritative positions actually sympathize with the people that they're trying to bust or break down. And what is your take on that? I mean, obviously you didn't have that problem. You seem very prideful in how you go about saying, I'm taking one on the chin right now, but I'm going to fucking crucify this guy later. Like what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I was fascinated by it. I've gotten some criticisms for that portion of the book from guys, from friends who are in cop clubs. They've taken cop clubs, formatted their vests, to mimic an outlaw biker gang style, which I don't have a problem with in and of itself. I do when cops form a cop club to ride together, mimic the appearance of a biker gang, and then also mimic the mentality and the attitude of it, of when they are intimidating people, out there being the tough guy. We had guys that were in cop clubs when I was with the Angels trying to come up and socialize with us and doing the whole, like, hey, what's up, brah? And it wasn't flying, and they were embarrassing themselves. And And they were, you know, I was present on a couple occasions. They were told, like, man, we have nothing in fucking common with you, man.
Yeah.
You cats need to go. Like, you think that because you wear that vest, like all of a sudden, like we're cool. Like you're playing by our rules now.
Yeah.
And our rules, you know, like they don't give a fuck if you have a badge or not. Yeah. You're asking to come into our world now.
Yeah.
So you're going to play by our rules, and our rules say, you know what, we're going to freaking beat you down.
Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, trying to delve further into the why, you know, like you said, like you don't see that being sympathetic to Crips and Bloods and mafia dons and drug traffickers or human traffickers or coyotes, you know, slinging people across the border. Like what do you suppose it is about that's the one thing? The only thing that kind of came to my mind was the next point, which where you talk about the OMGs are America's only true indigenous form of international organized crime. You know, and to me, I never thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. And so, you know, does that play a role in it, in that there's almost a sexiness to that draws cops in?
I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's glamorous and it's sexy. And I think, you know, things like Sons of Anarchy fueled that. Mm-hmm. But you look at organized crime in America, it comes here from Italy or Sicily or Russia or the Orient or Africa, because there's money to be made here.
Yeah.
You know, we're a wealthy nation. Those elements of organized crime come here to acquire their wealth and run their scams and commit their crimes. But the outlaw biker, you know, that was invented here. Yeah. And when you see it, I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, like just the Angels themselves are in every continent with the exception of the ice caps. And they'd probably be there too if motorcycles ran at 80 degrees below zero and there was money to be made.
Yeah.
You know, one of their sayings is the sun never sets on a Hell's Angels patch.
Yeah.
The Angels have expanded to the point into like worldwide that there are more Hell's Angels in Europe than there are in the United States.
Yeah, that's something, again, even in your book, you find it hard to believe. It's crazy.
And for some of the club politics, when they take votes, like when the different factions, like Europe has the ability to outvote the United States.
Really?
and overrule the United States on certain policy decisions, like internal political decisions, which you'd think, like, man, wait a minute. Like these guys, you know, that like this is California based. Yeah. You know, California is the motherland, and Oakland is the Mecca. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, and dudes in Germany are gonna like be telling California how to handle their business.
Yeah,
it's almost like the monster that Barger created got too big for him to manage anymore.
Yeah,
you know,
man. That's fascinating stuff. You mentioned Sons of Anarchy, just real quick. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but what was your take? Have you watched it? And what is your take?
Yeah, I watched it. I was entertained by it. I think there was levels of authenticity in it. A lot. A bunch of their actors and their consultants were angels.
Yeah.
You look at some pictures from the set, and you know the writer-director Kurt Sutter's wearing red and white gear. He's wearing angel support gear. There's 5 or 6 different Hell's Angels, either active or past, that are in his show with reoccurring roles. I found it a little bit entertaining that my experience is that real life, the people involved weren't nearly as good looking as the people who played them on television. You know, there were no Charlie Hunnams. You know, in real life. Yeah.
Was there anything that stuck out that was just like, yeah, it's just total bullshit? Like that was just almost to the point of being egregious.
Yeah, I think, and it's, I don't think it was intentional. I think it's for the purposes of storytelling that the speed and the density of the events in the show, like an individual event, may have been authentic or based in reality, but to have 5 shootings, in a single day, and then next week they have 5 more shootings and beatings. It's like it's compressed for the purposes of storytelling for television.
Yeah, so it's like a from concentrate violence.
Yeah,
yeah. The it's again, I watched it. I loved it. It was I watch very, very little TV, but that is one show that I did watch that I enjoyed. But so kind of moving down the story, you'd kind of sort of fiddle-fucked around with different smaller elements that were, kind of affiliates or people that were associated with some of the Angels. And then the ATF basically says, okay, we're going full tilt on this thing. And they named it Operation Black Biscuit, which I know is a hockey reference, but if I'm being honest, it sounds like a strip club in Atlanta. But to me, that name fucking cracked me up. But one of the things that I not to criticize the way you guys handle your business, but I found it, I guess, odd in that the Saturday before the day-to-day operations were kicking off, you guys have what we would coin as like a pre-deployment party where, you got a 16-man platoon, the whole fucking platoon gets together, wives, kids, barbecue, dogs running around the beach, everybody's having a good time, and, it's kind of the send-off. It's like you guys had this same kind of party, but to me, the thing that I was like, God, I don't know how good of an idea that is that, now you're kind of, you're making people see things they can't unsee that could be detrimental or even compromising of the operations, in terms of now this wife knows that wife's husband is involved, and vice versa. And it seems to me like, as much as I get the whole camaraderie thing, like with us, it's easy to separate it because we're all going halfway across the fucking globe.
Right.
But here it's like you guys live in these communities and you're operating not far away and you're going back and forth. Like, did anybody ever bring that up? Like, hey, is this the best idea to get everybody together? Or
yeah, it's I've over the now 15 years since that case ended, I think I've been asked probably every conceivable question that I could imagine. Until today, until that one, I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah. The fact that that people unrelated to the investigation were being exposed to who the undercovers were.
That's the military operational security side of me, I guess, and thinking that, like, that from an OPSEC standpoint, like I could see that being detrimental. But. Yeah, or
now that you've asked that question. Now it leads to other questions in my own mind. I'm out as an undercover operator, and I'm pumping gas somewhere in town, and one of these cat's old ladies pulls up, who isn't trained in the protocols of how we work, and says, "Oh, hey, Jay," and tries to engage in a
how's Gwen? In
a conversation. Like maybe not being perceptive of the environment you're in. Mm-hmm. So that was, that's a great question. And that did, when posed that way, create some probably self-invited vulnerability in it. Yeah.
Yeah. That was my thing, was that, hearing, reading the speech from your supervisor Slats and just kind of thinking about it from that perspective, like, shit, I've got a couple other kind of operational security questions. Might as well just throw them in now, I guess, is twofold. Is one, what did you do, or were there any protocols that you had in place, safeguards to augment or to mitigate that? Because to me, like, Tucson's not that far from Phoenix. You live there, like, to me that seems kind of danger close, like cops who are running shit in their own counties, or if they live in the district that they're a PD, or they're an officer in, like, you can only imagine, just like the question you brought up, like, or the time you ran into, the tattoo artist being one, but, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but there has to be, different elements of different undercover operations, if they're all run that way, where, like, you're inviting certain potential things. Like, to me, if I was running it, would make sense. Okay, you live in fucking Tucson, you're going to go undercover in New York.
Right.
Like, was there ever not a thought of that? Of just like saying you're going to almost deploy, like, when you go undercover, you're away from your family, and it's like going overseas in the military.
Yeah, that was discussed. And actually, when Slatella came to me and wanted me to lead the undercover phase of the investigation, I felt like there was people that were better suited and better choice for that role. One of the reasons being that we could import someone from out of the area. The argument against that was that we had, or I had, pre-established credibility in the criminal community that we wanted to use to ramp up and accelerate the process versus importing someone from outside the area, forcing them to start from scratch. In my exposure in the area, people knew Jaybird, and they knew that he was looking for guns and bombs and drugs, and that he had money in his pocket, and I had relationships there. So
more believable.
It let us hit the ground running, and it didn't. It really didn't give the Angels the ability to ask anybody like, "Hey man, who's this new dude? This dude just pops in out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's a player."
Yeah.
We had a history. There was a history behind Jaybird that added street cred to him.
Plus, if you've lived there 15 years, like if they do some serious digging, like dude's got a home address, utility bills, all that kind of stuff. Or
like the backstopping that we had was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
To the level where on 3 different occasions the Angels hired private investigators to go look at Jay Davis.
Yeah.
Those private investigators went out, did their job, came back to the Angels, and told them exactly what I had been telling them.
Yeah.
So they were paying private investigators to research me.
Yeah.
Those private investigators were confirming everything that I told them and adding to my credibility.
Wow.
The private investigators weren't blowing me up. They weren't compromising me. They were making me stronger.
Yeah. Man, that's impressive. I got to tell you. I mean, I've worked with enough government entities to where my confidence isn't that high in some of them, but that
we had we had our cover stories built, and obviously we had all the basics of the mechanics of appearing to be a real person within the various databases and ways to electronically chase someone. But I mean, we had high school yearbooks created with photos inserted into them that if someone would have went to, where I told them that I went to elementary school, and if they could have gotten through all those firewalls to the point where they actually opened up a file cabinet and pulled out, a student's file. Jay Davis was there with grades from 1968 in 3rd grade.
So is there a division within the ATF that's what they do, is like that all they do is buffer people's backgrounds and make them credible?
There's an element of the agency that's dedicated to building that backstopping for the deep cover long-term infiltrations.
I mean, in some respects, it's fascinating, but I can't imagine doing that for a living. Like, Jesus Christ, that'd be boring, But
I think you have to be of the right mentality for it. I think there's people who are absolutely love it. They're
suited for it,
and they're they have that kind of espionage mindset about them.
Yeah. That's surprising and impressive, no doubt about it. The next kind of part that I wanted to get into was, we talked about it a little bit already, but the kind of the essence of peacock feathers, which I already mentioned. But I find it, being brought up over and over in the book, just kind of the importance of confidence. Here you're just starting out on the Black Biscuit full-blown operation, and you're with a group called the Red Devils, and it goes like this. We stood around and bullshitted. The Red Devils mingled with a couple of other OMGs, most notably the Spartan Riders. Their center patch was a vertically oriented battle axe bisected by a pair of crossed swords on a blood-red background. Looking at that patch, it hit me for a moment that these guys were, for the most part, just as full of it as we were. It's a simple formula. If you look tough, then you are tough. The posturing by us, but especially by these so-called outlaws, was unbelievable. To me, this is something that I live every day dealing with dogs, because you can't explain shit to a dog. And so 98% of dealing with dogs, and not just, Fluffy the fucking golden doodle, but, the dogs that I deal with that want to bite the shit out of everybody. That's their bread and butter. The way that you interact with them, your presence, your confidence, what you bring to the table is everything with those dogs. And what's interesting is it's the same way with these guys, is that your ability to, you're talking earlier about kind of stroking their ego, but being able to carry yourself of saying, even though I'm stroking your ego, like, you'll look them right in the eye and be like, motherfucker, I'm not scared of you, and making them understand that. It seems like, one, you guys realize that, but the irony behind how full of shit they are about it. But, what was that like, having to kind of constantly live in that state of mind?
I think the understanding of, coming to understand how much they realize on shock effect. Mm-hmm. They want to scare you. They want to intimidate you. They want to be walking down the sidewalk and see you walking towards them. And when you see them, they want you to cross the street, mm-hmm. so that you're afraid to walk past them. They want to be sitting at a bar and see you catch eyes with them and see you deflect away. They get off on that, yeah. Right? That shock factor, that intimidation factor. But when you understand that that's what it is, then, like, you really don't play into it anymore, and then it takes that away from them.
Yeah.
They don't hold that over you.
Yeah. Did you find that there were times where that was bolstered more? Obviously, like, if they're in front of their whole crew or whatever, it's going to be magnified. But did you ever find that you had interactions with these guys where you'd kind of pull their man card if it was one-on-one, and you're like, what the fuck are you going to do about it? And they're like, oh, I know, everything's cool. And, like, they kind of chicken shit it out.
Many times. I think there's, when there's one guy by himself, oftentimes their mentality was different. But now when you got 2 or 3 or 5 or multiples of them, there's nowhere to hide. So, like, everyone knows the story now. Everyone's seeing what's going down, and now they have the expectation on them to profile up and act a certain way, because that's the expectation, and that's the lead that they're gonna follow. And they don't want anybody. They don't want their boys going back saying, "Hey, look, so and so handled his business this way. He was a bitch today." They can't have that. But one-on-one, when there's no one there to confirm or deny what you said or did, very different vibe.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it just kind of further confirms how full of shit a lot of that bravado is ultimately, just like you're talking about, when you run into tough guys that are tough, most of them don't have that element to them, and again, I use the term peacock feathers because it's a dog with his hair up trying to scare you. But one thing that I did notice, again, that kind of continues to reverberate through the story is the focus on the brotherhood and how tight these guys are, which everybody kind of, I think, expects that or understands that or has some idea of it. But even for me, I was surprised at the lengths at which, some of the culture of what this is trumped everything else. And I'll read the following excerpt. Hell's Angels live for their club and their brothers. One of their credos is step down or aside for no man, no law, no God. They are free men unto themselves. At the root of this liberty is the experience of riding a bike. Their Harley-Davidsons are the vehicles of their emancipation. Emancipation from society's rules and expectations, from a life of work and obligations, from other men, wives, girlfriends, and family. Of course they have jobs and wives and girlfriends, but these things are secondary to their status as Hell's Angels. The things that the rest of us depend on for safety and consistency were never there for these men. They're outcasts. The way they see it, why should they return any favors? For these men, it's the smallest steps from outcast to outlaw. The irony is that while their appearance and lifestyle are clearly set up in opposition of those who live straight lives, they are hardly distinguishable from one another. Their individuality is confined by a rigid conformity. All wear the same kind of clothing, ride the same brand of bike, and adhere to the same set of club rules. All must report once a week to church meetings, and all must pay monthly dues. The cuts forever remain the property of the club, cut meaning their jacket, as do the skin patches, in other words, tattoos, that each new member must receive. If for whatever reason a brother quits the club, then the Hells Angels are bound to go get his residence and remove every article of clothing, furniture, and memorabilia that contain any reference to Hells Angels. Not merely to punish and divest him, but because the stuff simply is not his. If the man in question leaves on good terms, his skin patch gets an out date. If he leaves on bad terms, then these tattoos are carved off, in some cases taken back with a cheese grater or with a clothes iron on the linen setting. You know, to me, the irony is what strikes me as being kind of the most contradictory, in terms of them being so hell-bent on fuck society, fuck the rest of the world. You know, we're our own crew. You know, we're above everybody. We're not bound to any of that shit. But then they're at least that rigid, if not more rigid, themselves to what they live by. Like what
it surprised me too. You know, for a group of people that presents themselves that they don't want to live by any rules or society's rules, and then you look behind the curtain, and it's nothing but rules and bylaws and protocols, both written and unwritten. I've had guys saying, you shake hands with a Hell's Angel, you never shake hands with a riding glove on your hand. You shake hands, skin to skin. As a prospect, I was told, never let your front wheel cross the back tire of a member when we're riding in a pack. Those were just unwritten rules, let alone the list of bylaws and all the expectations. And I was like, man, I thought you dudes were like, riding high and living free.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, man, I got to remember all this shit.
So are there no bullshit like manuals that have, this is our code of conduct?
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah. There's bylaws, there's written bylaws. And then each charter, makes its own rules on how they expect their, some of it's so, very logical and makes sense, like a no needles policy, not a no drugs policy, just a no needles policy, man. Obviously that's, like no organization, they're smart enough to know,
you're doing the hard shit.
It doesn't, it doesn't serve us well to have junkies.
Yeah.
Right. I think it depends on the leadership of that charter as to how hard those rules are enforced and who they're enforced on.
Yeah.
So then you look at that and it's like, okay, well, it's not all that much different than society anyways. You look at our government, we have rules. Well, ultimately, who's breaking the law? Who do they have favor with? It depends on how hard we punish them, if we investigate them.
Yeah.
It's universal. It's human nature. It's the human factor.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a ton of hypocrisy too. A lot of these guys who are quote unquote, screaming and fire and brimstone, pounding the fucking pulpit about do this, don't do that, or doing the things they're telling you not to. And it's like, as a leader, there is no quicker way to fucking make you look like an asshole than to do that. Yeah. And make your guys say, well, fuck this guy. I'm not going to war for this dude. I'm not putting in fucking work, when this guy's not even fucking playing by his own rules.
Well, and I think that's, like the values of leadership are universal, whether you be in law enforcement or the military, or whether you're, in an outlaw biker gang.
Yeah.
The human factor of how we perceive leadership and how we want to be led and what we expect, doesn't really change all that, at least in the core principles.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And, one of the things, again, kind of this leads into, some more irony, but stuff that I find, stuff that we're going to start getting into kind of the psyche and the things that you had to deal with within the job, and where now as a law enforcement officer, like the whole reason that you're doing what you're doing is the greater good. But now you're having to make some pretty fucking tough decisions on what to do, when to do things, or to not do anything, and basically turn a blind eye to shit that you don't want to, because it's serving a greater purpose. And this next quote, as a father, kind of struck me a little bit and made me think that would be some tough shit to deal with. And a lot of our guys deal with that overseas when we see some shit going on with kids or with women or whatever, where it's tough to process sometimes. But you're at a trashy meth house, gun by, and you're observing some severely neglected kids by some shitty tweaker parents. And Rudy, who is, you know, one of your informants that you're working with, who, you know, technically in your small club that you're currently in is the president. So you kind of have to deal with his shit. But he comes walking out of the house and it says, Rudy walked out of the house buckling his belt. Ilana stood on the porch waving like a wife whose husband was off to work. He walked up to us, 3 bikers rubbing sunscreen into each other on a hot Phoenix night. What the fuck, I asked. What the fuck with you? I had to get a piece. You know how it is. These hens can't get enough of this old rooster. I didn't like Rudy's behavior, but I couldn't call him out on the spot. I had to maintain the appearance that he was the president of my club. I wanted to tell him he had to stop acting the way he was acting. I wanted to push him out of the way, march back into that trailer, and arrest the losers we had just dealt with, but I couldn't. An undercover constantly trades his or her ethics for the greater good of a case. I knew this kind of thing wouldn't stop on its own, though. Barely 2 months on the job, and Rudy needed to be reined in. Old dog, old tricks, new problem. For me, that's where I would have a hard time, is seeing, and I know as a father, especially the ages of your kids at that time, of seeing like these toddlers that are, you know, had their fucking diaper on for 5 days and underfed and filthy, and you know, like they're standing in the doorway watching this old dude plow this tweaker, and it's just like, Jesus Christ, like how do you deal with that? Like how do you put that aside and just say, well, it's, you know, it's for the greater good, so I'm gonna let it slide?
I don't think you do. I don't think you ever do. I think at times things like that haunt you. I think there's times when you have to figure out another way to solve the problem. With a kid, you just can't leave a child in a situation like that and write it off to the protection of your cover. You know, like we can't do anything about this because I can't blow my cover. You can't let a child just be suffering like that. Now, is there a way to circumvent and backdoor in like child protective services, or create some pause and have another reason for an overt enforcement operation to go in there and create some distance where you can wall yourself off from it? You know, that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because if you're not there to ultimately protect people like those kids, then why are you there?
Yeah.
Why are you there?
Yeah. That's a good point, and it's something that you know, I think it's good to hear that, you know, and that, you know, if there's a back way to kind of work to, you know, make a mental note and then say, hey, if I can call this, you know, get involved or whatever, it's a good kind of happy medium compromise. But you know, reading several different issues where you're like, I wanted to split this guy's fucking forehead open and I couldn't because he was slapping a woman around or whatever. Yeah. It's like, you know, that dichotomy of trying to walk that fine line would be a challenge for sure.
Well, I think that what the most difficult part are kids, and then people who are maybe in those situations involuntarily. Mm-hmm. If you're if you want to be a biker or you want to hang out with bikers and you choose to, and you put yourself in the environment and then freaking you get socked in the mouth, it's like, hey, you know what you were doing. Yeah. You were walking into that. If you're a woman who understands what that lifestyle's about and how women are treated, and you return to it, or you continually seek those opportunities, or you want to be around it, to some extent, you know, what happens to you, you're anticipating. It's the people that are unwilling or unable to either remove themselves from that situation, like kids, or who get sucked into that situation, which like a lady, like I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, like Cynthia Garcia, mm-hmm. Who ends up involuntarily getting in a situation, yeah. And you know, like tragic consequences for not being willing to play the game they want to play it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and to me, I think the thing that you know that should resonate with most people is understanding that, you know, that you guys have to go through that, you know, and how hard that is. Because I think, again, because of the misconception that Hollywood provides by and large, is that it's sexy, you know, is that you guys are, you know, snorting coke and it's all just fucking cool. When the reality of it is, it's everything but that. You know, it's dangerous, it's fucking stressful, and it's constantly having to compromise things and decisions that you make, and put up with shit to be able to get to that next step. And that leads me into the next passage, where you can see a shift throughout the book where you go deeper and deeper and deeper into your character. And one of the things that I found fascinating was after a trip to New York on business, you visit the World Trade Center's Ground Zero, and you come back, and your daughter Dale is having a pool party. There's a bunch of other kids, and it kind of strikes you looking at these kids who are now, young teenagers, and you're thinking to yourself, like, how do these girls either, go from being where they're at to a Hell's Angel chick and whatever, but it manages, no matter, even though you're going further into character, it dawns on you to give your daughter this piece of advice. And you pull her over in the middle of the pool and you say, hey, I want to talk to you. And she says, right now, is this about boys? It's not about boys, not really. It's more about you. Just listen. Never, ever do anything that you don't want to do just because someone else says so. If someone wants something from you that you don't want to give them, then you don't give it. Understand? She didn't say anything. It was too awkward. Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew Gwen would have to clarify the message later. What I'm saying is, you're the most important person in the world to yourself. If you carry yourself with respect and determination, you'll be fine. Other people won't respect you unless you respect yourself first. Understand? I guess so, Daddy. Just don't forget, you have only one reputation, so guard it and protect it. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. She straightened up with a quirky smile. But you're telling me what to do right now, smart ass. Listen to your old man on this one, okay? Okay. She turned back and ran and jumped in the pool with her friends. To me, what I find reassuring is that even going through all that, it still had an impact in terms of you being able to provide that kind of advice to her. But I'm curious, how was that going through that of seeing the shit that you were dealing with, and then how you're trying to apply it to your kids?
I think at times probably as screwed up as I did get during that operation, that they ultimately provided balance for me, like a grounding in seeing your own kids and seeing like the unfortunate situations that some of these kids were in, and like almost the blessing to be able to provide a life to my kids that they didn't have to go through that. I think you probably, like you look at your deployments, right? And you go to places with poverty and with things like that, and you realize, man, it's a blessing to live where I live, in the country that I'm in, with our problems and our warts and everything else, man. But we still have it better than everybody else.
Yeah.
I would see elements of that world, and although my personal life wasn't perfect, it was still, I was like, man, like we got it pretty good, and I got it pretty good, and my kids got it pretty good.
Yeah.
Because how easy would it have been for them to have been born into this lifestyle with these parents and these elements to have to deal with as a child?
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, my perspective changed 180 degrees deploying for all those same reasons. It gives you a perspective. You can tell people till you're blue in the face, what it feels like, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to kind of see it and live it to really grasp it.
Yeah.
But I was, I found it neat that even amongst all that shit, you were still able to pull some pretty viable life lessons and dole them onto your daughter. It was good shit. All right, so one of the things that I know people want to hear about is the love interest, so to speak. In terms of your character having to involve a female in the role, and obviously, for cover reasons, like it makes perfect sense. And you can only imagine. I'm sure you've been asked everything under the sun with that. I won't delve too deep, but I think it's an important and interesting component to undercover work, of having to kind of walk that line, but how big of a role that women can play in certain instances like that of making your cover story seem much more legit. This excerpt is real quick. I knew Slats had hit the glass ceiling with the brass in securing a female operative. Like it or not, this business takes place in a man's world. I'm of the minority opinion in law enforcement circles that women are as capable and as essential as men in undercover assignments, but the truth is that they have a hard road to walk. Most of the time they play girlfriends, runners, or mules. What I needed was a woman whom with the Hells Angels would actually respect. And so you bring in this new agent, JJ, who's young and pretty green behind the ears in terms of her experience and all that. But one of the things you talk about of you're in the minority opinion in terms of the role they play. I mean, I agree. A hotbed topic is women in special operations or women in certain roles that are historically, for men or whatever. And to me, it's not so much can they or can't they, it's should they or shouldn't they based on does it make sense? And I have, my opinions on it, but I'm curious to get your take in terms of, how was that bringing the female in and what challenges did that present?
Yeah, I think it was imperative that we did it. I think that is probably an area where special operations and law enforcement probably have a pretty big divide, because I think that's ultimately where the jobs change to some extent. In special operations, the physical aspect of what you guys do gives such a strong advantage to a male.
Yeah.
Right. Speed and strength advantage. Whereas on the law enforcement side and in an undercover capacity, intellectually, the challenge is there intellectually. So a woman can do what a man does. The physical challenge isn't as great.
Yeah.
And then you take a woman and just a female present changes the dynamic of an undercover deal, and the testosterone in the air and the alpha dogs, growling at each other. Yeah. And a woman coming in there can take the edge off that, and can say things and do things that a guy can't. Your opponent, your suspect, isn't physically threatened or intimidated by her. And the fact that women are highly involved in the criminal activity in various roles. So when Jenna became involved, she ultimately became involved, at least initially, because we needed cover. There were women running at us, and we couldn't talk off, continually dismissing these women. We needed someone there to protect us from the other women. Yeah. But she got to the point where she was, gained their trust and was involved in her own negotiations and her own deals. Yeah. Because over time, the way that she carried herself, they realized that they could trust her and they could believe in her. Yeah.
Well, it seems too like the other side of that coin is just like there's certain things that men are only going to talk to men about. There's certain things that, the women who are playing such a large role in some of the criminal components are going to tell Jenna things that they'd never fucking tell you, and so to me, I can see, it providing a number of benefits, not just the kind of the obvious one of making your cover story seem like, okay, well, the dude's just not wait a minute, he's this, tough guy, and he's, at an age where he should be more interested in women than he is. This doesn't fucking seem right. That's, a pretty obvious component, but the background stuff of her getting and being as much in terms of the infiltration of them is valuable, right?
She was huge in intelligence gathering and hearing backstories from the women, the insider stories that I wasn't going to hear, and that none of my suspects were going to tell me. Mm-hmm. Jenna was constantly revealing at least interesting aspects to the dynamics of what was going on that we could then almost cross compare with. Man, this is what Jenna's hearing from one of the old ladies. Does it make sense with what we're seeing and hearing? Yeah.
Did while we're on the subject of her, one of the things that I wondered is that, are there times where for the cover story, obviously you don't have to get so intimate with somebody, But there has to be times where you're kind of like walking that tightrope of like, we got to do this. Like, sorry, but you know, like, how do you, is that just kind of an understood thing? And how does that work?
I think it's, I think that's why it's important that the right people are chosen, is that if you don't have a chemistry with that person, and you're being looked at and scrutinized by all the people around you, they're going to see it. They're like, you can't play boyfriend, girlfriend. You can't play husband, wife if the chemistry's not right there. Yeah. Or if the chemistry's not right, then the way you're playing it better be that you're at war with that person and that you're pissed off and that you don't like them or that you hate them. Now, ultimately, maybe that's believable in that world. I had great chemistry with Jenna. I enjoyed her company. I respected her. I thought she was smart. I thought she was a great agent. She was a hard worker, man. There was never a time when Jenna wasn't willing to work. She was always work first mentality. Yeah. She carried her weight, and she had not only the respect of the suspects, but she had the respect of the people on the task force for like what she did above and beyond. And like we all had great chemistry with her. She was a part of our team and did anything and everything that anybody else did to further the mission. Yeah.
Were there times where, you know, in terms of like having to, you know, being a married guy, and I don't know if she was involved or not, but like where you guys have to show each other affection to a certain extent, like how, like, is that something where where it's almost like you're throwing the muskrat safe word out, like, hey, don't, or is it just like, hey, we'll do what we have to do, and it's fucking is what it is? Or
what? Is there times in the role where you're at a party? It's not, you know, it's not like we're walking around holding hands like with like, you know, pinkies clip, you know, like, you know, I had to put my arm around her, had to kiss her, had to freaking grab her ass, you know, freaking, you know, smash her freaking tits, right? Freaking, you know, because in that world,
that's what they do.
In that world, it's like, you know, now I tried to, I didn't want to insult her dignity. And I was careful not to, because I didn't want to set the precedent, like in other people's eyes, as to how like she was willing to be treated, even by me.
Sure.
I felt like I had to set a standard as to how I expected her to be treated, because if I didn't, then how was I going to hold somebody else to it?
Sure.
Right. So I that not only went to like how I interacted with her on a physical level, but like in our conversations. Like I tried not to be insulting or demeaning to her or putting her down or making her that arm candy. I tried to communicate with her in a respectful way, because I wanted other people to see that was the standard that I had for her.
Yeah. No, I think that those are good points in terms of just from a credibility standpoint. Like if you don't respect her, none of the guys are.
It was verbal and nonverbal.
Yeah.
You know, if you're constantly running someone down and insulting them, everybody around it who hears it's like, man, he has no respect for her.
Yeah.
He treats her in an undignified way. So then why would I think that they would then trust her or believe in her or have any faith in her to do anything if the person that's in the relationship with her didn't?
Yeah.
Right. I had to, in how I interacted with her, both verbally and non-verbally, physically, all those things had to show that she had my trust and she had my confidence.
One of the things that, you know, stemming from that, well, there's two questions I guess I have. Number one, did you guys ever do anything funny, like go into a room next door, like, oh, I'm gonna plow the old lady here, and like go in there and make noises and bang, like just to put the show on? Like, did you guys ever do stuff that far and above? Because some of the shit, how deep you guys go to sell some of the other things, like, is that something that you threw in there or no?
Right. I don't know that we necessarily went and locked the door and were banging on the walls and yelling in there, but there were times when we isolated ourselves, right? And you know, I think it's human nature that our imaginations will take us places and go farther than what we actually see
Absolutely.
or hear.
Yeah.
And not just in this, in everyday life.
Yeah.
And so creating at least an illusion for suspects as to what they thought was going on. Like their imagination was going to be way worse than anything that we could, than any skit we could do for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's again, some of the life lessons that you pull from this book and the stories are invaluable. And to get to sit down with you and hear them, in person is pretty awesome.
Well, with these street theaters, like you were saying, like with regards to Jenna or any of them, it's like I viewed it as the whole thing, the big picture of this case was inaccurate conclusions from accurate observations. Mm-hmm. I would accurately let them see me selling drugs, doing gun deals, being in fights, accurately let them see me carrying myself like within a certain lifestyle. They inaccurately concluded that I was a hitman or a gun runner or a drug dealer or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately what Undercover is.
Yeah.
Is inaccurate conclusions formed from accurate observations.
Yeah. It's brilliant stuff. I mean, it's almost like sleight of hand, but in real world life.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff, and my hat's off to you for how good you are at it. It's really neat to read about. Last question on JJ is that as things kind of progress and shit gets more and more tumultuous between you and your wife Gwen, is that this comes up again, and I'll read the following excerpt. Gwen wasn't surprised when I showed up with my arms done, talking about your new tattoos, but I guess she was a little disappointed. I guess you're just a biker now, huh? We were in our bedroom getting ready to go to a barbecue, but I was tired but rallying, sucking down a Red Bull. I poked her in the ribs. Are you kidding me? I don't even like riding bikes. That's not funny. I think it is. She didn't say anything. She went into the bedroom. I sat on the bed, jonesing for a smoke. When she came out, she looked great. She pointed at my tattoos and asked, what's she think of them? I bet she loves them, huh? She who? That woman you're working with, Jenna. I'm not even I know what's going on, Jay. Gee, nothing is going on. Even if I wanted to, and I don't, I wouldn't have the fucking energy. No, you wouldn't have the fucking energy, would you? I sighed and maybe rolled my eyes a little more than I should have. Gwen repeated, no, you wouldn't, and walked back into the bathroom. To me, this is one of those things where I can't help but just sympathize with you. Like, Jesus Christ, you're getting it from all sides, but obviously that, like any spouse would. I mean, you in the same boat, I would imagine you'd be like, what the fuck's going on with what's his name?
Yeah.
Like, of course you're going to think things like that, and especially when she doesn't know what you're doing, doesn't hear from you for days. She knows that you're playing that role. Like, God damn, that's got to be hard on a marriage.
Well, what we, the story we just told about how our imaginations make things
Same
worse for the suspects.
Yeah.
Well, can you like the same thing was happening with Gwen?
Yeah.
Her imagination of not knowing or feeling like she was being given like bullshit counterfeit explanations only made her imagination worse as to what was taking place. And then when you don't have the ability to put your finger on something or investigate it or confirm it yourself, it makes it worse more.
Yeah.
So what was going on in my life, that was going on the investigative side, on the suspect side, was going on the personal side, in my personal relationships too. And for my kids, my kids, they kind of know what dad does, but then they don't see him and they hear stories. Their imaginations of what takes place are probably even worse.
Yeah. That's I can only sympathize with you. I can't even imagine having to deal with that. I mean, what has your wife met? Did she ever meet?
Yeah.
Everything ended up all right, and they got along, and
they're I think they're from two different worlds, and I don't it's not like they're buddies and call each other, but it's not like they had a cat fight either. But you look at it like you translate it to special forces, right? So guys deploy. And it's not like you're in daily contact with your spouse. And so as a consumer of information, as an audience of television and film and books, you don't hear from someone, your wife or your girlfriend or your mother or your sister is thinking, man, I haven't heard from them.
Yeah.
And in their mind, they've created a situation or an environment that you're in that may have no basis in the fact of where it's at, but it's real as fuck to them when you're thinking it.
Yeah. Well, and the thing with military guys, it works both ways, because you're halfway around the globe and the old lady's back home and she's going out with her friends and she hasn't had you in 6 months, and it drives some guys fucking crazy.
Sure.
Understandably, because it's like you're sitting in a fucking sandbox in a tent with 30 other swinging dicks, and there's what San Diego's like, or or wherever you're from is like, and that same thing, like, didn't hear from you, I know you went out, didn't hear it, it'll drive guys crazy, and it's that same thing. It's
without a doubt. And it doesn't even have to be imagined to the dirtiest, darkest place. Mm-hmm. If you're over there fighting battles and your girlfriend's hitting the town, you don't even have to think like who's fucking her tonight. You're just thinking she's sitting there having a drink with her girlfriends, and some dude's coming up to the bar running his game on her. Yeah. And that if you were there, that dude wouldn't have the balls to step to that table, but you're not. And now she's dealing with it on her own. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it can be that simple.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And same thing, your mind is your worst enemy, when it comes to that. 'Cause especially it's so magnified over there by, isolation, concentrated men, chaotic fucking combat with other men, and it's just like, it's this bubble that exists that makes everything just exaggerated, but.
Well, I think the big difference too in what you did and your people did and me is that, so I'm operational in this case and I'm away from home for an extended period of time. But if home's really melting down, if one of the kids ends up going to the emergency room, it's not like I can't call time out and get home in a few hours.
Yeah.
When you're across the ocean, that ain't happening. Yeah. That ain't happening. Yeah. You know what? They're going to have to deal with, both sides are going to have to deal with it best they can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's tough. No doubt about it. But, so moving on to the next, and again, this is kind of a natural downward spiral, to a certain extent, is that, for whatever reason, there's a big October celebration. I don't know what's, October, why it's such a big month for the clubs, but it seems like you guys throw a bunch of parties there. But there's the Mesa biker party where the song Freebird comes on from Skynyrd. And, you kind of relate it to as almost the anthem of your life. And it kind of speaks to the bigger meaning of how purpose fuels all of us. But I want to read this quick blurb. A VIP section was hastily cleared by prospects and bouncers, and free alcohol began to flow. Women popped up like mushrooms. Lynyrd Skynyrd's Freebird played over the system. This has been my song since junior high school, a song I took to heart from the first time I heard it. There are songs you respond to because they tell you something about yourself that you already know but were maybe unable to articulate, and there are songs you respond to because they help mold your image of yourself. Freebird was both. As practically everyone knows, the lyrics talk about the impossibility of stable love between a woman and the freebird, who is a restless, wandering soul. This restlessness is what has always spoken to me. It recalls my inability to reach any kind of lasting satisfaction and reaffirms in a cruel twist that I can only ever remember my failures and never my successes. Looking in on myself, especially since the case has ended, I regard this trait to be one of my weakest. The irony is that satisfaction is all I really want. This is where my restlessness comes from, and where it turns into action, into wandering, into searching, more often than not in the wrong places. I am an undercover cop after all. Therefore, I'm just the guy in Freebird who cannot stay, who cannot change, and whose Lord knows he cannot change. To me, can you expound on what that really exemplified in you as you start to self-realize that you're going further and further from Jay Dobyns and going further and further into Jay Bird Davis as a character?
I think that a lot of that comes from, like we talked about earlier, the athletic background. Mm-hmm. Is that as an athlete, You can't allow yourself to be satisfied and content. And the best ones are very self-critical. You don't pat yourself on the back for what you do well. You criticize yourself for the things you don't do well, and then you work on them and you try to fix them. So that translated into my personal and professional life, and it's still like I'm still terrible at it. Like that hasn't changed. This may have the story or may have focused it, but I never feel good about anything I do. I always am critical of myself and feel like I've fallen short or could have done more or could have done better. Not a night comes where I don't lay my head down on a pillow and think about all the things I did wrong that day. Yeah. All the things that I said that I shouldn't have said, that I didn't say that I should have, that I did, that I shouldn't have done, that I didn't do that I should have. I'm just not a person who gets to the end of the day and says, "Hey, man, let's make a list. Let's recall all the good things you did today, Jay." They never get locked in. Yeah. It's only the bad stuff. It's only the criticisms, which, I think for some people is a blessing and a curse. Yeah. The blessing in it is I think it keeps you challenged and it keeps you trying to improve. The curse is that you never give yourself any credit for anything.
To me, what's interesting about that is that it's not a lack of confidence. Rather, it's an inability to give yourself credit for anything. Like going into something, you're as confident a guy as I've met. And obviously the things that you've done on behalf of the ATF and Uncle Sam, like you couldn't have done those having not been uber confident. But it is an interesting twist, I think, in that you've got you're brimming with self-confidence going into something, but afterwards you're like, "Oh, I fucked that up," and like you're a perfectionist to the point where it's almost a detriment.
Yeah, and I think that's like I said, the blessing and the curse is that when you're seeking and striving perfection in anything, it's if not impossible, at least improbable. Yeah. But does that mean that, what I didn't want to be a guy is I didn't want to be a guy in anything, either as a person, as an athlete, as an undercover agent, as a father, as a husband, as a friend. I didn't want to be someone who, and we both know these people, who are willing and quick to celebrate giving themselves a C on something. Yeah. They perform average and they want to feel real good about it. I wanted to hopefully give myself or strive for an A and then figure out why couldn't that have been an A+? Yeah. I didn't want to celebrate something that I thought that was less than perfect.
Yeah. And act like it's your first time in the end zone every time something goes your way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as you go, again, kind of further down the rabbit hole, one of the things I fucking love is you got the ATF to pay for a shit ton of your tattoos, which is great. God bless it. I can tell you, every military guy out there listening is laughing his ass off. But because if they could get Uncle Sam to pay for their ink, goddamn, we'd all look like tribesmen from fucking a Nat Geo commercial or something. But as the transformation occurs and you get inked up, one of the things that I found neat, though, was kind of the irony depicted in the tattoos that you got, ironically, from a Hell's Angel tattoo artist. But in terms of kind of accepting evil to defeat it, in the excerpt that you talk about, that goes like this. I didn't think about it too much when I told Mac I wanted my sleeves to depict good and evil. I knew that deep down I was good, but I also knew that in order to survive and do my job well, I had to appear evil. What I didn't admit that I was in the process of giving in to my darker tendencies. I'd been tamping down the good in me for months. Ironically, I'd accepted evil in the service of defeating it. What can you tell me about in terms of the tattoos reflecting that and just what that meant to you at the time?
Probably this life struggle for balance in my life. which I still struggle with. I struggle with every day. It's like, I think the tattoos are probably a physical demonstration or example of that. Even just the process of getting the tattoos, when if I had an outside, if I had an outline on one arm and a shaded piece on the other arm, drove me nuts. Yeah. Like, I wanted the pace and the appearance to stay the same and stay balanced. Yeah. You know, like my rings, you know, it's like if one is off, if one's missing, everything's fucked up.
Yeah. Do you sleep with those fucking things?
They never come off.
No shit.
They never come off.
I'd knock my own fucking teeth out with it.
They never come off.
If you're listening and check out the YouTube video, you got to flash the rings. Jesus Christ. I mean, you fucking...
Like, I go to the gym with them. I sleep with them. Like, my fingers have grown around them from not having come off, you know?
Yeah.
I have, which again, that balance, that good and bad, you know, I have Mother Mary on one side, which symbolizes innocence and sweetness and peace and to me. And then I have the lion's head on the other side, which, because I always like that saying, you know, everyone wants to be a lion until it's time to do the lion shit.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like this good and evil, even here.
Yeah.
Physically where you see it, but it's like, you know, my brain and my wheels like fight that like every second of every day too.
Yeah.
To the point where there's days when I'm like, man, you need to check yourself into a freaking mental hospital, man. Yeah. You're freaking losing your fucking mind.
Yeah. Well, do you think? I mean, it almost sounds like some of the elements of your personality in terms of the patterns and making sure things are even and balanced is almost more like an OCD thing. Like, are you that way with towels and underwear and sheets and shit like that?
Yeah, I like everything in its box and in its place, and knowing where it's at, and knowing where if I need it, where to go get it.
Yeah.
Nothing pisses me off more than like looking for a paper clip and like, why aren't the paper clips where the paper clips go? Who moved the paper clips?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, it all fits together.
Yeah.
This is probably my favorite, or one of my favorite stories from this book, and it dovetails on to what I was talking about earlier about how in depth you guys go and to the lengths that you guys went to pull off some of the stories that would corroborate you being a debt collector, a hitman, whatever. And that was something that honestly fascinated me, between your background, you know, them covering the way that they do, and to the depths at which you guys would go to fool these guys that you were doing some of the illicit shit that you were talking about doing. Was a story where you go to, you know, the guy that had tattooed your stuff, or had done your tattoo stuff rather, wanted to get in on some debt collecting, and so you pull this scheme, which you don't realize it until after the end, but you know, basically you tell the guy, say, hey, you want to come with me on this debt collection real quick, and so it's all staged and set up and whatever, but you go to a Waffle House and there's this boob sitting there or whatever, and I'll go kind of right into where it is. You walk into the restaurant and then it goes like this. I sat next to the guy. Matt sat next to JJ. Mac, I fecked the guy hard. JJ stared at the table, playing the part of the dumb girl in the wrong place at the wrong time. I pointed at the guy's food and said, you eating that? Taking a fork out of his hand. He said, I was. Not anymore. I pushed the food around his plate and reached across, grabbed his coffee, and downed it in one gulp. You know who I am? I have a pretty good idea. Good. Just want to let you know today's your lucky day. He humped. See, they could have sent someone else, someone who introduced themselves by putting a fucking pipe in the back of your knee. I stuck my chin at Mac. He nodded slowly. But you got me. Great. Don't show any lip. I took a mouthful of his hash browns and mumbled, listen, don't talk. Dig? Yeah. Good. We're getting along great. Now here's the deal. I need that fucking money. I told Mac that the guy owed Big Lou 21 large. The guy said he didn't have that kind of money on him. I said that I hoped he didn't. He wouldn't be too smart to walk around with a wad like that. I asked if he had a checking account. He said he did. Well, then that means you have a checkbook, right? How much you got in that account? I reminded him not to lie. He said he thought he had about 17. I slid his plate over so it was in front of me and said that was a good start and we're getting places. I told him to start by writing that check for 17, to sign it but leave a pay to line blank. He said okay and fumbled in his pocket. I told him not to move too quickly. He didn't. Pulled out his checkbook, writes the check. You guys go about your business. You take a gun from him, ask to keep his hands on the table and ask him where the gun is. He said in the back of his waistband. I asked him if he had a concealed carry permit. He says, no. I told him to take it easy. What did I think? Was he a cop? He laughed nervously. I removed the pistol and slipped it into my pocket. I reminded him of the cash. He took out his wallet and handed over a small wad. I counted it quickly, $314. Put a 20 on the table, nodded at Mac. He got up. JJ and the guys stayed in the booth. I said, you guys too, come on. They got up. We went outside. So then you get back to the tattoo shop and you hand Mac $200 and say, see, 10 minutes, $200. That's how easy it is to make money with me. Now, to me, like picturing myself in that scenario, there's two things that kind of stick out. Number one is like, Jesus Christ, like that's pretty fucking elaborate just to make this guy think that you're a debt collector. But number two is that, you know, from an acting job standpoint, you know, like that's pretty significant, right? I mean, for JJ to act the way that she did, for you to pull that off, for the guy who's also an ATF agent that's playing the mark or whatever, the boob that owes you money. Like when I think about, you know, the Oscars, right? And it just makes me say like, well, fuck Hollywood. Like those self-loathing pricks sit around blowing each other about how good of a genius catalog that they performed with each other. And, you know, when it's like, it doesn't even fucking matter.
Right.
But the ability that you guys have, to pull that off in that depth detail on the fly with no fucking script, with no real pressure on you, like your fucking life depends on this. And your ability to pull that off in that amount of time on the fly, ad lib to that degree with the kind of pressure on your shoulders that if you fuck this up, it may mean your life. Like you got to watch Hollywood and just want to slap the shit out of them, right? I mean,
well, you know, what's funny is I just, a year ago right now, I was in Atlanta as the law enforcement consultant on a film called Den of Thieves. That's probably just cycling out of the theaters right now. Cops and Robbers movie about some kind of rogue cops in Los Angeles chasing some bank robbers. Gerard Butler's the lead cop, and his character, he plays a character named Big Nick, who's loosely based on me. And so I spent a lot of time with him, giving him the vibe, the undercover vibe, and how I tried to carry myself, and talking about street theaters. And some of the street theaters from real life made it into the Den of Thieves film, right? So in this coaching process, I had these guys who were studying like how to act as undercover cops. And at one point I felt like I needed to remind them. I said, you guys need to understand something. When you're working, they're pointing plastic guns at you, and the special effects team is loading you with squibs. In real life, they're real guns, and they're real bullets, and it's real blood. And for you guys, you have a script, right? And you get to deliver that line. And if you don't like it, you can call time out and try it again with a different inflection, with a different expression. Mm-hmm. If I blow a line, man, I'm going to get a baseball bat on the back of my head. Yeah. You know, and explaining that's kind of how, you know, how it goes, man. That's the reality of it, you know. And Butler's sitting there looking at it, and he takes a drag on his cigarette, and he's like, well, too bad for you, bud. And I was like, man, that was the best answer ever, man. That was a perfect answer, you know? Yeah. Plus the fact that I don't know what he makes for a film like that, probably several $1 million. Yeah. And to think that, you know, to portray that character and make that kind of money in that amount of time, for me to make $5 million doesn't happen. Yeah. I take all my salary over all my years on the job, plus all my retirement salary. I'm still not going to make that much money in a lifetime. We live in a twisted fucking society, don't we? I mean, the fact that that's the case, and that, you know, those people get idolized and looked up to, not by me, but unfortunately, you know, a lot of the public seems to idolize them and blow them, and I just don't get it. But you know, it struck me as like, you know, that's fucking acting. You know, like if somebody ought to be getting an Oscar and be getting, you know, accolades dumped on them and songs of praise and things of that nature, it ought to be you guys, not these fucking clowns, you know. But it's fascinating the lengths again that you guys go to. But so now, you know, throughout the entire book, you're going through, you know, stage after stage after stage of getting more and more infiltrated and part of the Hells Angels, to the point where,
you know, you're essentially going into your first church session, which is, for those of you listening, like that's their lingo for a meeting, as they call it, church. But you're about to be asked to be what's called a hang around, which is lower than a prospect, right? Basically, you're on that's like the initial stage of being invited into the Hell's Angel network. The quick excerpt goes like this. Bobby asked the questions. What is your name? Jay Bird Davis. Why are you here? To announce my intention to become a Hell's Angel. Why do you want to become a Hell's Angel? Because I'm tired of playing in the minor leagues. Do you understand what being a Hell's Angel means? I understand that I'll have to make sacrifices. Do you know how hard it is to become a Hell's Angel? I don't care how hard it is or how long it takes. I'm loyal, I'm dedicated, and I'm a warrior. All I want is a chance to earn the privilege of being a Hell's Angel. How surreal was that? Like from the 14, 15 years that you did working with other clubs, and then the 2 years that you'd put into this, to now like it's the shit or get off the pot like time of you're actually getting invited into that inner circle. Was part of that almost like it felt real? Because I mean it was, but I mean, describe that experience.
Yeah, I think it was. I recall it being a combination of excited and satisfaction and achievement and fear and panic that, like, this is what we were striving for. This is what we've been grinding for and sacrificing for. And it's here, and it's almost that at that point in time where you're like, man, you need to think twice about what you ask for, because here it is. And now, like, this is legit. This is like kind of like, hey, there's no fucking around anymore. Yeah. You know, this isn't like where we can step out or, like all the playtime is done. Mm-hmm. These dudes are legit, and they're real, and they're dangerous, and they're sucking us closer, and they're pulling us closer. So,
but some of it sounds like you were elated too, though, almost like, you know, not just because you'd been working hard to it, but like on the twisted, like you're part of that character, like you were fucking proud of how far you'd come and that you were making it, right? I mean,
well, you know, when we first started the case, like almost universally, we were hearing, what you're trying to do is impossible. Mm-hmm. It can't be done. These guys have been in existence for 60 plus years. They've never been infiltrated. People have tried and failed. And so when something like this happens, and it's not like us banging a door down, like they're pulling the door open for us and inviting us in, there is a huge sense of satisfaction of like, you know what, knowing that like you're sticking in the ass of all the people that said you couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, and you know, from that standpoint, was there a part of you on the kind of the twisted side even of like not just wanting to prove the ATF wrong, but the fact that like you kind of wanted to be one of them? Was there any sympathizing with that, or was it all on the law enforcement side?
You know, I know people, and I have peers and friends who developed a sympathy for the people they were working on. For whatever reason, I never really went there for me. Mm-hmm. I woke up every day and reminded myself of who I was and what we were trying to accomplish, and who we were as a team and individually, and knowing that if one of us makes a mistake, or collectively we make a mistake, this friendship and loyalty and trust that we're feeling is going to end up with a straight razor on your throat. Mm-hmm. So were there suspects within the investigation that I liked and actually at times enjoyed spending time with? Yeah, there were. Were there guys that I just flat out didn't want to be around, that I had to be around? Yeah, it was like that too. Yeah.
I noticed, you know, one of the things that I remember reading a couple different times was like there was a former, I think it was a Vietnam vet that had gotten awarded 2 silver stars. It was just kind of same thing, kind of got sucked in or was part of it and didn't really want to be. But, you know, it seems like there's a lot of military guys, former vets, which makes sense. I mean, I'm curious, 2 things is that, you know, like for me, especially as a vet, it would border on impossible for me to to not have some sympathy for fellow vets that have been through that same kind of stuff. No different than you with some, fellow ATF agents, if it was, the transverse. But, one, did they use those guys' skill sets applicable, or were they applicable? Did they use, whether it's military intelligence or weapons or tactics, things like that? Did they take advantage of that, or?
Absolutely. That's who they want. There's, if not just the Hells Angels, if you're any motorcycle gang out there, actually any gang in general, like we'll even expand the umbrella and make it bigger than that. Like in Bikerland, there's always some cat sitting at the end of the bar that's got a motorcycle in the parking lot with long hair and tattoos and earrings that fits the profile. Unless that dude brings something to the table for your organization, what do you want him, man? What do you just want to assume and absorb dead weight for?
Yeah.
You have to have some value to make yourself interesting for them. Who better, if you're in the biker gang world, than members of the military? Mm-hmm. From the simplest level, from the easiest to understand, just the mentality of who you're getting, like that predisposed reputation and demonstration of loyalty and brotherhood and all those things that they preach. They've seen someone who's already been through that and understands it and doesn't have to be brainwashed or coached into it. Then you add on individual training and expertise that comes with you guys. Man, it's like that military member, the package of who that guy is super valuable to them.
Well, it seems like a lot of the structure is even kind of based off of a lot of military-esque components in terms of, breaking down the organization structurally, which makes sense, but obviously it works.
Sure. There's a hierarchy, a chain of command, the application of authority and taking orders and giving orders, all those things are in place there.
Yeah. That's it makes perfect sense. And it's, just something that I saw a lot in the book, I guess, of, talking about a lot of former military guys. But so after you become a hang around, now you're actually getting patched in as a prospect, and basically as that ceremony is going on or right after it, your daughter calls you, and you basically blow her off on the phone. She's asking about, or she wanted to tell you it had been her birthday. You got her a guitar, and she wanted to tell you how much she liked it, and you just kind of like, if I can call me later, and it hurt her feelings, pissed your wife off. When I read this, I'll be the first to admit, this one, and then the issues with Jack, with the rocks, which we'll get into next. But it really struck me as a father, is how fucking difficult that would be to put your kids through that stuff, and after you get off the phone, you kind of self-reflect and think, God damn, that was messed up, and I hurt her feelings, and let me call back. But the thing that struck me is what you say here, is when you say, after reflecting, is you say, the truth, however, was that I'd been all too willing to sell my family down the river if I thought it would curry some favor with the Hells Angels. I thought perhaps foolishly that my family would ultimately understand that if given an inch it was okay, even expected, for me to take a mile. The truth was that by then I wouldn't have hesitated in doing what I did to Dale again. Bobby's words came back to me, you have to give up everything to become a Hells Angel. His words had sounded ridiculous to me, but suddenly they made a grotesque kind of sense. I felt pathetic. No, I was pathetic. I was more bird than Jay Dobyns. My transformation was almost complete. I can't help but sympathize for you. And obviously that shit didn't happen overnight. You're talking 14 years of doing what you do, and then 2 years of immersed in this lifestyle. But now it's manifesting into where, like, that line of reality is fucking blurred, and you're starting to do things on behalf of the organization that you despise.
Ultimately, with reflection on that and with some time, that was my biggest failure. That's probably has been my biggest failure in life, is that and my biggest regret is that during the course of this investigation, I turned my back and abandoned and betrayed the people that supported me and loved me the most for the wrong reasons. And there's nothing I can do to go back in time and change that. I have to own it. Mm-hmm. I have to. I train wrecked my family for the wrong reasons, mm-hmm. chasing a patch, chasing a legacy behind this self-created hero syndrome that, like, you know, while I felt like I was out there protecting everybody else, my own family was melting down before my eyes, and I didn't even see it. And I almost felt like it was their job to suck it up and support me because I was trying to save the world, right? Yeah. And in the end, it was, you know, like all of it, including me, was counterfeit.
Yeah. I guess the question I have is that looking back on it now that you've had a number of years to look back, and now that it sounds like the relationship with your kids and wife has been repaired and they're great now. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. My family survived it. Yeah. Much more by what they did than what I did. They're all of them are better than I deserve. I tell people, you know, I made 1 million mistakes in my life, and they've given me 1,000,001 second chances.
Yeah. Is there any element or any framework in your mind where you can construct a scenario where you could have done what you did in terms of playing the role and selling it to the degree in which you needed to be successful infiltrating Hell's Angels, but have had the ability to balance your family life any better? I mean, that's an impossible answer, but
yeah, that's a tough one because when you're in an assignment like that, like with that role, people who dabble in undercover work or treat it like a hobby, they get hurt or they get dead, or the people around them protecting them get hurt or dead, mm-hmm. trying to fix it. If you're not all in, if you're not 100% committed, man, you're taking a dangerous situation and you're making it more dangerous.
Yeah, it's all in.
You have to go all the way. Yeah. You know, there was a time when I came home for a weekend and Gwen was just on my jock. You know, like, you can't come to this house and talk to us and treat us like we're your suspects. You know, and my response was, I'm not a light switch. I can't turn this off and on. I can't be this guy, you know, when I'm here, and be this other guy when I'm on the street. I'm not a light switch for you. And then her response was like, well, when you come to this house, you better install a damn dimmer switch and turn it down, man, because that shit ain't flying here.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I'd lost my ability to turn it on and off. And when I realized that, and when I realized what I was doing to my family, I could feel myself alienating them from them. It almost made it easier for me to just stay away. Yeah. It made it easier for me to just stay out on the road. Yeah. Because I could see what I was doing. I was like, no, this isn't good for anybody, but I can't stop.
Yeah. Now, I mean, to me, like, it's just like with the importing yourself to a different coast or whatever. To me, that's one of those reasons why I think it would make way more sense is like, it's either on or off. Just keep it on and just leave it. Just say, hey, I'll be back when I'm back, and you're not going to hear from me for 2 fucking years, you know, or whatever. But like, that would be easier on them almost, right?
Yeah. It's like when it's just being teased out there, you know, and you're getting little sample sizes of it.
Yeah.
You know,
and you know, like from a dog, not to make everything about dog training, but it's the same thing. Like if you're doing, you know, 2 training sessions a day that are 5 minutes long, but then the whole rest of the day you're letting the dog not do all that. That's kind of that same disparity. Like, well, no shit, he's not going to learn. Like it's going to be harder and harder as that disparity from the time you're spending as Jay Davis mounts and disparages the amount of time you're spending as Jay Dobyns. Like it's only natural that's going to happen. But so, you know, that leads me into the next, you know, talking with your son, and that, you know, having some strained relations with him also, is that he had gotten into this routine of handing you a rock every time when you came home. Before he left, he'd give you a rock, and you never kind of really understood it. And this last time is one of the last times that you saw him before the operation was over. he's getting ready to hand you another rock and said that he wanted to talk, to, basically just to keep you from leaving, and you tell him this. I told him I didn't have time. So he gives me the rock and I say thanks, and he asks if I know why he gives them to me. I say because he loves me or wants to show me how much he loves me, something like that. He shakes his head, says, "No, Dad, that's not why. I give them to you to help keep you safe." I ask, "So they're for good luck then?" He shakes his head again and says, "No, they're for whenever you get in trouble or are scared or you need help or something, you can touch one and know that I'm there with you." Wow. Yeah, no shit. I was too distracted to really get it then. In my mind, I chalked it up to the rocks being for good luck. It was easier that way. But now, waiting for these guys, I finally get what he meant. He meant he could make me stronger, even save my life. Not the rocks, but Jack himself. I put the rock away. I put my 8-year-old son, mature enough to come up with such an idea, back into my pocket. I hated myself for making him think that way. I was Bird, and hate was part of my MO. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a crier, but no bullshit, like reading that got me fucking choked up. Because I, as a father, have been in situations where, my children have absolutely fucking humbled me in terms of things like that, where they do something that's so innocent and sweet and, hard to even imagine that somebody that age can fucking grasp something of that magnitude. And I've been in situations similar to that. And I, for me, it really kind of broke it all down of thinking to myself, like, God damn, you're in a position where you're putting your life on the line, having to walk this fine line with these guys that are going to kill you if they know who you really are. Your family's crumbling at home. Your wife is giving you the third fucking degree every time. Your kids are breaking your heart, essentially, and you're returning the favor. And to top it all off, you've got, your administration, your higher-ups within your organization that are motherfucking you nonstop. And I'm just like, dude, I mean, holy shit. Like, that's a shit sandwich if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, that was and still is probably the worst day of my life. The day, maybe the best day in some ways, but when Jackie gave me that rock and gave me the explanation of it, at that point I realized ultimately, like in my perspective of myself, like ultimately what a failure I was. My job wasn't to be king shit undercover. My job wasn't to be Donnie Brasco Part 2. My job wasn't to rid the world of violent crime or infiltrate the Hells Angels. My job was to raise good kids. And I'd failed, or I was failing, because I didn't have attention for them. I didn't have time for them. They had become secondary to me. And that is like, to a public audience, to your audience with, the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that listen to this. That's a humiliating story to tell about yourself, to strangers. That ultimately in maybe your most important job and the biggest stage of doing it, you failed. And so there's nothing I like about that story. There's nothing that I admire. I don't even try to defend it. It was just a failure on my part on a lot of levels, that I let my life get to that point.
Yeah. To me, what I find refreshing, though, is the fact that it's in there. And I had this same conversation with some of the things in some of my last guests, some of the things that they'd put in the book, were not flattering, that were not easy for them to tell, that were not commensurate with what a lot of the public's image is of guys like you, like me, like, some of my former guests. And to me, I think it's why it's that much more important that it's in there, and I'm glad that it is, because it speaks volumes to the humanity that is in all of us,
Well, if I was going to write this book and put my name to it and promote it as being true and authentic, and if all it was hero stories and glamour stories and I love me stories, it'd been counterfeit as fuck.
Yeah.
It would have been a lie. there's some good stories and there's some success stories in there, but there's unflattering stories and there's failure stories as well, because that's ultimately what's true.
Yeah. I think it's brilliantly put together, you know, and I love every aspect of it. There's a lot of good lessons to be learned. As we kind of wrap up these last two passages, this is kind of where the crux of your time that you invested is that the very first excerpt that I leaded this interview off with, talking about killing the Mongol, and you had just done that, basically, proved it, you know, through various means, through, and I won't ruin the outcome for people that haven't read the book, but is that, you know, now you're bringing all of this back to your club, saying, hey, we just put in fucking major work. Where's our patch? You know, and they're like, well, just, you know, bear with us. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And to me, it's just like it all kind of comes crashing down, and you know, they're telling you to wait, and they got to, you know, politic their way, and we got to get votes. And you're like, motherfucker, patch me up now. And you say this: there I was, doing what I was supposed to do as a Hell's Angel, and instead of getting patched, which, having all but signed off on my family and disobeyed my supervisor, was all that mattered to me, I was getting jacked up by politics. I felt like asking Bobby, what are we, outlaws or lawyers? Because I know an awful lot about both. I felt like screaming, fuck the cops and fuck the World Council and fuck the other charters. I realized in that single moment that the brotherhood the Hells Angels claimed to be a part of was nothing more than a support group for misunderstood loners held together by hate and money. Everything revolved around money hustling and protecting the club against those we hated. We hated all other clubs, the public, the police. We hated our work, our wives, our girlfriends, our kids. Occasionally we hated ourselves. We hated everyone that wasn't a Hell's Angel. And even then we often hated each other. I say we because these were the people and things that I had come to hate too. I had been undercover for almost 2 years as Jay Bird Davis. That whole time I thought I was the one in control. I was the one making myself into a Hell's Angel. I thought I was the one infiltrating them. I had it backward. They were the ones who had infiltrated me. Tell me, how you can get a gist from the excerpt, but Jesus, what was that like with having to deal with that?
You know, I think part of the process is part of the training they put you through is the brainwashing of how you're supposed to think and act, and the mentality you're supposed to hold, and that like all-encompassing love of the patch and the club, and that nothing else is important. It's your religion. And you know, like I think, you know, you ultimately start buying into it. Like at least believe in the way you're supposed to act to be that person. Whether or not you believe in or agree with the philosophies or the theories of the club, at least how you're supposed to conduct yourself as a part of it.
Yeah. Was that, I mean, when you went through that experience though, was that, I mean, to me, it reads like that was where it was kind of like a look behind the curtain and you saw it was all bullshit. It's like the Wizard of Oz, like, wait a minute, what the fuck?
Yeah. Oz isn't the all-knowing and powerful. It's a little gremlin back there pulling levers.
Yeah. Like you just like, this is all a crock of shit. Like I just put my family through this for 2 years and this is really what it is.
Yeah. It's, ultimately, the joke was on me. Ultimately, the joke was on me. Yeah.
And that's where my last passage that I pulled from the book, before we just go through a couple of, kind of interesting questions. But, to me, it's where it's kind of the aftermath of coming to the stark realization that what you had become, and we've been kind of building up to this, in terms of your personal life and what have you. But, this last excerpt just kind of, I think, exemplifies where you were at personally and professionally, all kind of wrapped up into one shitty deal. I was no angel. The Mongol murder was not as simple as it appeared. I'd lied, and what a lie it was. I'd reached the pinnacle of my abilities. Deception had become my stock in trade. Like water that seeps into a crack and later freezes, expanding the crack into a fissure, deception had found the cracks in my character and exposed them. I felt like a soldier who'd become accustomed to killing, who even looked forward to it.
Deceiving people had, at the beginning of my career, made me uneasy. But by the time I'd been accepted by the Hells Angels, my capacity to deceive defined who and what I was. I didn't think of myself as a liar. Lying was simply what I did to do my job well. Nevertheless, I was a champion liar. I'd not only lied to my suspects, but I'd lied to everyone I knew, including myself. I'd been undercover for too long, and my experiences had altered me in some basic and very dark ways. Is that how, did you feel like at that point when it all kind of came crashing down that, was there an element that was almost suicidal or that you just thought, I've ruined my life and there's nowhere to go from here?
Yeah, the story, my personal story, expands beyond where the book No Angel ends and some of the things that happened after the case. But I definitely arrived at that point in my life, not simply because of the investigation, but because of some of the things that took place after. But yeah, I felt like everything that I was, everything that I stood for, everything that I believed in was all fake, including me.
Yeah.
It was all fake.
Yeah. There's just kind of a handful of questions that I wanted to ask before we wrap it up here. I know we're a little short on time, but some of the things that I know people are going to be fascinated by or have questions about, and myself included, the legalities, right, of being undercover in terms of when killing. A lot of people assume that you kill people and you're snorting coke, off of strippers' tits and all that stuff. And what I gathered from the book was that, anything you do, you have to justify basically that your life's on the line. Somebody's got a gun to your head and says, if you don't snort that blow, I'm going to spray your brains all over the wall. Like, that's got to be a hard thing to deal with because, obviously they don't want you being a loose cannon running around doing crazy shit. But on the same token, you got to pull it off. So right. Is that kind of the golden rule, is that before you do anything, make sure that you got to justify that your life was actually in danger if you didn't do it?
Yeah. And there's not a thin line between right and wrong in my eyes. There's a thick line, what you can or can't do, what is legal or illegal in the role. And as a law enforcement officer, you have to be cognizant of those things and understand entrapment and make sure that you're not creating or inventing criminals. Mm-hmm. There's also a defense strategy that's oftentimes used in undercover cases called outrageous government conduct, where a defense attorney will tell the jury, this undercover officer, my client may be charged with crime X, Y, and Z, but this undercover officer was so outrageous in his conduct trying to capture him that he's worse than my client. Yeah. Like, the undercover officer should be on trial, not my client. So yeah, you're confronted with all kinds of perilous situations during the course of something like this, from drugs to women to like we talked about, seeing children put in compromising situations, and money and all the things that can lead to your downfall. And so every day, every decision is a potential train wreck. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's walking a dangerous line, which there has to be, I'm assuming there's a number of cases where guys did take it too far and ended up, undercover guys fucked themselves over because of some of the dumb shit they did, right?
You look at that environment as an undercover operator, on the top shelf, it's life or death. You could lose your life, based on mistakes, but just a half notch down below that is that, you could lose your family and your friends. And then a half notch below that, you could lose your career, all on, a series of decisions that you're making, in a stressful environment, at a high rate of speed, day after day, after month, after year.
Yeah.
It's like the odds start working against you. Like, eventually I'm going to fuck one of these up and it's going to be the end of everything.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see that being a a dark road that's easy to go down real fast. And again, I think it further exemplifies the.
And I think, like, so you're confronted with these situations. Once you make a compromise to that standard and bend the rules, now, man, the next time it's easier to bend them. Mm-hmm. And it's easier to bend them the next time a little bit more. And then pretty soon that little mistake you made, now, like, you can't even remember how little it was, because now they're big and they're dangerous, so you can't even let that door open.
I mean, to me, in this case, the slimy criminal defense attorney would actually be right, though. It's like you get to a point where you're no better than the guys you're investigating, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah. And then so what are you doing there? What do you like part of the challenge of undercover work is that if you can't go into that role, and if you can't investigate your case and investigate the crimes without getting as dirty as the people that you're investigating, then it's not the right assignment for you.
Yeah.
Then it's not. That's not how we play.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's a tough road. One of the kind of the logistics questions I had was the deconfliction of undercovers and regular cops. Like, there's a number of funny stories. Some of them are funny, some of them are shitty, but like getting pulled over or calling favors in Vegas, or the mob boss thing was fucking great. For those of you, you got to read the book. It's awesome. But is there kind of a standard protocol for deconfliction between you as an undercover guy and, okay, hey, we're rolling into Vegas, so we got to let so-and-so know, or is it just kind of just totally depends, and sometimes it works out and sometimes you get fucked? Or
in this situation, the Hells Angels infiltration, our task force and our operational security was super tight.
Yeah.
Very, very few people knew about it, to the point where we had decided, hey, if we get arrested, do not come out of roll. Just play it out. Someone will come at some point. We'll figure it out. Someone will come and get you. Do not call time out and try to tell some arresting officer, like, hey, I'm undercover, man. You need to let me slide out of this.
Yeah.
Let's let it play out, and let's resolve it so that in the eyes of the suspect, it continues to be real, because we knew that was a day-to-day possibility.
Yeah.
To the point where, on more than one occasion in this case, the police kicked my ass.
Yeah.
Right. I got my ass beat by the police on more than one occasion in this case. So, and that was part of it. That was the cost of doing business.
Did those guys ever come up to you afterwards or years later and anything, be like, dude, I didn't know,
Yeah, I did. I actually had a conversation with a guy, a couple years after the fact. And he said, like, man, I was the one that, put that whipping on you, man. And I was just like, look, hey, you know what? In hindsight, that's like not how we do things. That's not, that wasn't good policing. But at least as another cop, I understand your frustration on how it got there.
Yeah.
But just like, man, that's like, you're really walking a fine line when you're not, that's not even a good term. You're not walking a fine line when you act like that as a law enforcement officer. You're crossing the line of what is not appropriate. We can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you told him?
Yeah. I told him, like I said, man, we cannot, we're better than that. We have to be better than that. You can't get frustrated with someone, with a suspect, and just put a beat down on them.
Yeah, because you're pissed.
Yeah, because you're frustrated and because you're trying to intimidate them out of your town.
Yeah,
like we have to be better than that.
Yeah, yeah. I wondered about that because shit, it happens several times in the book. But one thing, again, this was kind of from the OPSEC military intelligence side of my brain, I guess, is that a number of times you answer your personal cell phone, like your kids or your wife are calling, whatever. And to me, I was like, holy shit, really? And to me, the first thing I thought of was like, number one is that, what if that rolls you up? Like, I was, I guess, confused or surprised that there wasn't some sort of protocol where, like, hey, your personal cell phone goes in like a safe at your safe house. Here's your fake personal cell phone that you roll with. And I was dumbfounded to find that.
Right.
Like, because, I'm thinking two things. One is that just by answering it, that may roll you up. But number two is, what if they're like, motherfucker, give me your phone. And now they take your shit, and now they got your wife's number. They got, I mean, like, was that an oversight, or is that?
Probably an oversight. Probably, as ridiculous as it might seem, probably a budget concern.
Jesus Christ. You can afford all this other shit, but you can't get a burner phone.
I'll tell you where it continues to impact my life today is that I got so accustomed to deleting call logs.
Yeah.
That, I mean, like years later, I still delete my call logs.
Yeah.
And like, there's no reason for me to. I'm not receiving any calls, or I don't have any messages that are compromising on my phone, and I still find myself deleting my call logs, deleting my email messages, deleting my Facebook messages, deleting my text messages.
Yeah.
Not because I'm like have anything to hide or I'm afraid someone's going to see something on my phone. It's just habit of what I was doing in that time in my life.
I mean, obviously this was back in the early 2000s where most people had a fucking Motorola StarTAC, or, it was all flip phones or whatever. But still, I mean, I was thinking about it. I was like, dude, if I was in that position, there's no fucking way I would have my personal cell phone.
Yeah. And at this point in time, we were still using digital pagers.
Yeah.
We were getting page codes to, to call, or to get out or whatever it was, so it was, that technological revolution was hitting, but it, not like anything like we see today.
Yeah. It makes you feel old and makes you realize how fast things are progressing.
Exactly.
when you think it wasn't that long ago what we were using, and yeah, it's nuts. But on that same kind of front, you were wired a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. Like, am I that naive or fucking that far behind technology wise? I mean, they didn't have, a fucking pack and a wire up your chest, or did they?
They did.
Like, how holy shit, that seems
in both.
ballsy.
From when I started in 1987, when we were using Nagra recorders, which were like basically the size of a paver brick that you like duct taped into the small of your back. That was like a no shit reel to reel tape recorder.
Yeah.
With microphones run up your back over each shoulder so you could get stereo sound. From that, during the Black Biscuit, Hell's Angels infiltration, technology was improving. It's not like it is today, but we had mini recorders. We had transmitters that were disguised as everyday items that we could carry around. But and now today the standard and the size of what's being used is amazing, and the quality of those recordings. It almost, in some ways, it works to your disadvantage, because like Hollywood and television shows these, movies and television shows where a jury's being played a video of an undercover deal on television, right? Like real life juries expect that same quality, and they expect that same, like they want it like in 70-inch HD and everything to be perfectly clear and perfectly understandable. Probably, like from in your world, like some of these shows will show like some satellite shot that's from 20 miles high, which drills down and sees someone pick up something,
what the logo on
tiny,
the baseball cap is.
And it's like, man, you know what? Okay, like let's not confuse the entertainment industry with reality.
Yeah, but so you guys were rolling hot with fucking wires up your shirts, and
there was times because at that point in time, which is an antiquated piece of equipment now, but just that 1 watt Kel transmitter like had the best signal and the most power. And so it was cumbersome, and it wasn't as easy to conceal, but it was effective. So you'd have the box sometimes taped in my boot with a microphone duct taped up my leg. Or sometimes you'd have that box like fucking tucked underneath your nuts, if you thought like, hey man, today's the day, or I'm dealing with someone who potentially is going to shake me down. They're less likely to freaking, like look super hard in my junk than they are like freaking in the small of my back. So I'm giving myself at least a fighting chance.
Yeah, man, that's surprising. Again, I was like, holy shit, I can't believe they're mic'd up all the time. But Could you just quickly describe the mud checks? You went through several of them. I'll let you describe it. But were there any that either you went through that didn't go right, or did you see any where people fucked them up and they got?
Well, we knew that the mud check, which is the test where they're gonna do something to challenge you to see like how you react. In essence, to flesh out if you're legit, if you aren't a cop, things like that. So much of the game of the street theaters we played were designed not only to add to our credibility, but to defeat mud checks. When we were doing street theaters in front of suspects and letting them see gun deals or drug deals or patch ceremonies or whatever the scam might be, when they did come with a mud check, if they did cut a rail out on the back of a toilet tank and say, hey, you know what, you need to suck that up, it gave me at least a plausible, deniable excuse to say, like, are you fucking serious? Right? After all the shit you've seen me do, after all the beatings and drug running and gun dealing that you've seen me do, like, you want to really test drive me right now? You want me to suck this rail up, you fucking punk bitch, right? Yeah. like how about fucking I test you, yeah. You know? And that was my flip. That was one of the ways that I escaped hardcore drug use. Yeah. If they cut a rail out, after we had these series of street theaters performed in front of them, I'd say, hey, look, all this shit that I did in front of you, that ain't good enough. Now you want me to prove myself this way? How about this? Let's go shoot some fucking cat off the street corner. You know, I'm going to test you. Yeah. Like, oh, you think you're freaking busting my balls, man? Hey, I'm going to suck up a line of fucking coke and that's going to tell you whether I'm cool or not? I got the same questions about you because I'm ready to fucking get down. Let's go on the street corner and let's go blast some cat. Yeah. You down for that? Yeah. You know? And try to flip it on them, yeah. And try to spin things on them, and try to like take their game and play it against them. Yeah, that's fucking awesome. You can. For those of you, you probably won't see it on the video. Maybe you can hear it in his voice, but like the fucking level of intensity that just spills out of you when you start talking like that, it's fucking great, man. I love it. Like your intensity just skyrockets. You can fucking feel it. It's awesome. Just real quick, like the ATF and coworkers' response to you writing the book, did you get any like, dude, what the fuck, or any pushback like that? Or, yeah. Because I know, I certainly have seen that happen before, but. Yeah. Beyond pushback, ATF sued me for it. Oh, no shit. Yeah. Which was entertaining in and of itself because ATF had No Angel on display within ATF headquarters, like in a public viewing area, like for visitors to see, hey, look, like this is a story about our agency and what our guys do, and like, look at, we're cool. At the same time, they were suing me for the book, saying that that it damaged the agency and compromised tradecraft and a bunch of made up shit that they had to invent to get some payback, which I thought was just so. The fact that they were promoting it within the headquarters building and at the same time suing me for it, I just thought was classic ATF, man. Classic ATF. Those cats can't do the wrong thing right. Fucking classic government. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to tell you I have different experiences with different government agency I've worked with, but I don't. But that's fucking great. Well, I think that it's almost universal in law enforcement and the military. The guys, the cats with boots on the ground, cross agencies, whatever, they all usually get along pretty dang good because they have a job to do and they want to go do it, and they really don't give a shit who gets the credit for it. Yeah. They just want to work together and they just want to go accomplish the mission. And every step up the ladder, all that shit becomes more important and influence, and like, who's telling who what time it is, and the competition between, the various agencies for statistics, for budget money, for credit, all those things. And then, man, you get up at the top, man, and you got people who've forgot where they came from. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing in the military. You get a bunch of spineless fucks that are more worried about their promotion and their evals and shit like that than anything else. Of course. And every decision they make is pure politics driven by exactly that. Well, how is this going to make me look to
to my superior, and it's fucking
Of course.
crap, you know.
Well, and then, you know, corruption rewards corruption, man.
Yeah.
It takes care of itself.
Yeah. Yep. One of the things I noticed, were you a smoker before this? Like, was that an easy role to fill? Because
No, I wasn't. You know, I didn't smoke prior to this case, and started smoking because it was a lot of times it was an escape.
Yeah.
Like when weed was being passed around, when drugs were being passed around, if I could just hold up a cigarette, at times was all it took.
Yeah.
You know, and then to the point where, you know, one thing led to another, and you know, at one point in time, I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, I did the same shit. I smoked like a fucking chimney overseas on deployment. I mean, at one point we raided a fucking Iraqi cigarette factory in Baghdad and got cartons of cigarettes that were all like fucking moldy green. Tobacco's nasty as shit, but we smoked the hell out of them. And
right.
Same thing. Like I don't smoke now, but over there, like it just, it's weird. It just makes sense, kind of, you know.
Yeah.
But I wondered, do you smoke since then, or is it? You
know, I smoked for a while and struggled, and I have like my little vape, my little electronic vape that I you know, use as my pacifier now. But definitely not burning. You know, not burning through 3 packs of Reds a day like I was.
The two things that I found ironic was, number one is that you talk about loving Starbucks. Like the extra foam lattes with low-fat milk and sprinkles and shit, and you're like, yeah, that's my shit. Fuck off, no, you know.
Yeah.
Like you drink this badass biker guy like drinking these fucking unicorn lattes or whatever the fuck. But then the other thing too is that you don't really like riding motorcycles, right?
No, yeah. Well, some things never change because on my way over here today, I stopped at Starbucks and had a vanilla sugar-free latte with almond milk, right?
That's fucking great.
And then even I have a motorcycle, and it sits at my house with the battery out with a sheet over it because I never ride it. And it's a nice motorcycle. It was never my thing. Even when I was doing it, it was never my thing.
Yeah, that's wild. Just real quick, before we wrap this up, I just want to say, is there kind of where are you now in terms of your career with, obviously you retired, they sued you sued them back. Is that right? It was kind of a cat and mouse. Like what's transpired since you got out and kind of where you're at now? Tell people where they can find you and what you have going on.
Yeah. In a nutshell, when the case ended, you know, the threats came, which were to be expected. The Angels farmed out murder contracts on me. The Aryan Brotherhood, the MS-13, some street gangs, Russian mob were like offered contracts. Couldn't get any help from the agency to address them or to confront the suspects. August of 2008, my house was burned to the ground. My family, you know, barely escaped. ATF was not happy with me about my exposure of their failures and through my book, and some executives worked to try to frame me as the arsonist of my house.
God,
you know,
damn.
thus, like they, in essence, accused me of and tried to build a case as me being someone who would murder their own family by a fire.
Yeah.
Went to court over that, but you know, to defend myself. I'm still like trying to stand up to the bully, you know.
Yeah.
Won the court case, proved all my allegations. DOJ instantly appealed it. They told me like, hey, we know you're going to win. We know the facts, but you're never going to be allowed to win. We got more money, more time, more attorneys than you, so we're just going to fight you until you can't fight anymore, which we're still fighting, right? Yeah. You know, I basically said, you know, you freaking, I'm going to win or die trying. Mm-hmm. And I do some training. I train gang and narcotics officers and undercover officers, a lot with an emphasis on the mental, emotional side of the job. You know, hopefully helping people avoid train wrecking their lives like I did. Yeah. Based on my mistake, using my own mistakes as examples. I coach high school football, which I love being around the kids. I love the kids more than I love the game, to be quite honest with you. The game is the mechanism that I use to interact with them, but I just like being around the kids. Yeah. I do some corporate speaking here and there. I do some consulting in the entertainment industry on law enforcement films, and I'm as busy now in retirement. I retired 4 years ago. I'm as busy now in retirement as I was when I was operating. Yeah, just a different a different day, my day's formatted different, but it's nonetheless just as packed.
Yeah. That's one of the things I wanted to ask now that you brought it up was like just thinking about coming here, right? Like, I mean, obviously you can figure out who I am, when we approached you about doing it, but like you drive yourself crazy if you're worried about shit all the time. But like even something as pulling up on this driveway, like there's got to be something in the back of your mind. Like, am I about to get fucking mud sucked here? Like, who is this guy? Like, I can only imagine. And I'm curious, like, how do you live with it other than just saying, fucking, if it happens, it happens. I can only be so careful. Yeah. But like, is that still a bit, that's got to be a hard thing to deal with still, right?
Yeah. I've seen firsthand what they're capable of, the violence they're capable of. But if I live in fear, they win.
Yeah.
If I live with caution. I try not to put myself in bad situations. I don't want a problem. I'll avoid a problem as best I can. But I've always felt from the beginning of my career, like even getting shot my 4th day to the end of my career, I've got God's hand on my shoulder and a pistol on my hip, and I'll figure it out. But people always say, like, man, aren't you afraid? Aren't you worried? I'm like, hey, man, I have my old lady start the car in the morning, man. I'm good.
That's fucking great. I mean, I guess seriously speaking, though, do you feel like, or do you even know, is the threat from them, is it as high as it was 10 years ago? Or?
No, it's not as high. It was very active, and it was very real at one point in time. From the best of my understanding, from sources in the intelligence community, the hits themselves were never recalled. They were never backed off. But who wants to fill it? In the end, really, when you think about it, who wants to kill a cop? What does that mean to your organization if you go out and assassinate a cop? Mm-hmm. It's not like it's never happened before, but it's just the blue wave that would come down on them is massive. And at this point in time, with this much distance between the end of the case and today, there's zero upside.
Yeah.
The one thing that you can't ever contain or necessarily control is that lone wolf dude who says, man, I want to be a hero. Yeah. I want to make my bones. I can pull this off and I can get away with it, and I will be
the guy.
I'll be a legend, right? You can't contain that guy. You don't know who he is. You don't know where he's at. You don't know what he's thinking.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, man, it's been fucking amazing having you here. I can't thank you enough for coming. What I want to express to the readers is that this book was magnificently written, and you may say, well, you say that about everybody that comes on your show. I do, and it's not because I say that because they come on. I bring them on the show because that's what their fucking book is, and he is absolutely no exception. I found myself literally not being able to put this book down. I stayed up late, and I also found that it was a lot funnier than I thought it would. I was struck a lot of times by the sense of humor that you have and that your crew had is very similar, very dark and fucking twisted, which is a whole nother conversation. But in terms of being able to compartmentalize and deal with the shit that guys like us go through, you have to have that. But I was laughing literally out loud a number of times reading this fucking book, and I loved it. Do yourself a favor and go get this book, or I'll tell you like the last guest we had, or choke yourself. Because it's that good. And I think it sheds a lot of light on guys like Jay and the sacrifice that they put themselves, their families through. And it's a story that Americans ought to hear, because it's fucking gripping and it's important, and you need to know the type of work that these guys are doing. The personality that comes out of it is very, very succinct and gives you, like, I feel like I know you from reading it, and that's rare in a book, in my opinion, in these days, at least for the ones I read. But so anyway, get yourself the book. I'm going to end on a very simple quote that, in my opinion, kind of encompasses Jay's work and this entire 3-hour conversation that we've just had, and it's by our good buddy Nietzsche, who I'm cousins with, by the way. He's my third cousin. Just kidding. He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long enough into the abyss will also gaze into thee. Very simple, very poignant, and from my neck of the woods and guys that I've worked with, and I know in your line of work the same, is that I don't think there's a more apt quote that should be a cautionary tale in terms of be fucking careful how hard you fight guys, how long you do it, and the depths at which you're willing to go to do so. But
truth, end of story, period.
Amen. So again, Jay, can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's been
really
awesome.
honored. Really honored.
This has been the Mic Drop. Thank you for listening, and we will check you guys next time. Thanks.